Hey, everybody, it's Devin and James here. We're here before we enter the Den of Sin to say a little bit about the Anchor app and Anchor FM, where we record our podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place.
Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
And if you're like James and myself living so far apart, we record ours and we're able to upload onto Anchor FM with no problems at all. And by hosting on Anchor, they distribute our podcast to all of the listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. It's a huge list.
It's everything you need to make a podcast in literally one place.
And you know what the best part of all is, James?
Is it because the Anchor is totally free?
It's because Anchor is totally free.
That's always the best part. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
All right, and on to the den. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Den of Sin. This is Den of Sin with Devin and James, a movie podcast where we talk about pretty much anything we want to talk about involving movies. I'm Devin Lucas, and with me, as always, is my co-host, James Dufresne. How you doing, James?
I'm doing good. Back from a much-needed vacation, ready to record this podcast.
All right. Where'd you go?
Well, that's interesting that you asked, Devin, because I think I saw you. I went to California. Hadn't been in
That
a
was
few
you?
years. That was. I know it gets confusing because there's two of me, but it was the more handsome of the two. But yeah, I went to California. I went to Southern California, Northern California, hung out with two of my favorite people on the earth. Yeah, it was a good time. It was great seeing you in person, Devin.
It was great. It had been actually a very long time, and we got to meet up with another friend of ours on our adventure, and we brought him along tonight too. In fact, this is our big Halloween episode. Happy Halloween, everybody!
Happy Halloween! This is our annual Halloween tradition now. Is this second year or third year? I honestly don't know how long we've been doing this.
This is our third year of doing well, we're in our third season.
Yeah.
So
okay.
we're like, hitting 2-year anniversaries, but like into our third years.
Yeah, because
But Halloween is always when we bring in our friend Casey O'Connor, and we've done it again. Thanks for coming back, Casey. How you doing?
Hello, everyone. Hello, gentlemen.
The Kramer of our podcast. And by that, I don't mean Michael Richards. I mean the popular...
Yes, please don't put the real life Michael Richards scenario on me.
I was going to try to make a joke there, but there was no way that was going to land. But hey, yeah, Casey, glad to see you. We always get good feedback when you are on. So it's a pleasure to have you on as always.
Pleasure to be on as always. Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure to see you both recently in person.
Why don't we talk about what we did real quick, since it is relevant to this podcast.
I thought we swore a blood oath to never discuss it.
Well, we're not going to talk about
not that. Okay.
Yeah, no, the podcast appropriate stuff.
Okay.
So while we were down visiting my favorite area of LA, the Magnolia Street of Burbank, which is basically a horror movie nerd's wet dream. If you are into horror movies and genre films anyways, Magnolia Street in Burbank is a ton of great horror lover spots. There is Halloween Town, there is Dark Delicacies, there is the Mystic Museum / whatever, their whole cadre of stores. But yeah, that was really fun. But Casey was nice enough to treat us. If the generosity of Casey cannot go unstated. He took us to a place I didn't honestly think I'd be going to anytime soon, but we got to go to the Academy. Is it the Museum Academy? I don't even know.
It's just the Academy Museum.
The Academy
or Academy Museum of Arts and
it's the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures.
Motion Pictures. There
you go. Instagram, where I
there you go.
Photo, yeah.
But literally, you just type in the Academy Museum, and that's what it is.
Everybody, I'm sure, just would be totally understandable if we just called it the Academy Museum. But yeah, it was great. It was a fantastic museum. It's right next door to LACMA. It's if you are a movie lover, again, it is a great destination. Newish, so I have a feeling in the next 2 years it's going to get even more and more impressive. But yeah, great spot. It was such a great addition to the vacation. Kind of made the rest of the vacation kind of hard to live up to. But yeah, it was a great spot. Thanks for taking us, Casey. It was really fun. If you're a movie lover and you're in the LA area, definitely check it out. It's amazing. Did you guys enjoy it?
Absolutely. I mean, where else are you going to see Bruce from Jaws and Rosebud, the sled,
Yep.
and Francis Ford Coppola's weird green tuxedo that I can only imagine was produced through the humane slaughter of many Muppets that he wore to the Oscars when he won for The Godfather.
It's so funny because when I saw it, I was like, it's not like I necessarily recognized it, but I literally had to, I literally used deductive reasoning of like, whose it could it be?
Yeah.
And then based off of size, gaudiness, I was like, there's only a few people this tuxedo could belong to. And it was weirdly none of the outfits, none of the dress, like we recognized them, but none of them had any kind of placard or information, which I thought that was weird. Otherwise, phenomenal museum.
Apparently, there were little placards. I spoke to one of the curators who turned out to be an old Film Forum friend, Jenny He, if you're listening out there. But we mentioned it to her. We couldn't find the placard. She's like, "Yeah, they're like on the wall way behind it."
That's weird, but yeah. Either way, phenomenal. I mean, really great museum. Someday I'd like to go back and actually see a film there. In fact, looking at their film schedule, whatever there's a better word for that. Their program, there was a ton of great, their calendar. There's a ton of great stuff I would love to see there. So, Casey, you've seen films there, right?
Yeah, the David Geffen Theater, which they have two theaters there. There's the Ted Mann Theater, which is named after the guy that created Mann Theaters, and I haven't been in that one, but the main bigger theater is the David Geffen Theater. And that theater is huge, and it has this like amazing sound system, and it's kind of got this kind of Dolby Atmos setup where it's got speakers not only on the side but like down the middle of the ceiling and stuff too. The screen is huge. I've seen The Exorcist with a Q&A with William Freakin there. That was amazing.
I can imagine.
I saw Tron there, and it looked and sounded awesome. Yeah, it's literally one of my favorite theaters in Los Angeles now since it's opened. It's a really, really cool place to see a movie. And yeah, their programming is great. The kind of irony of it is, unless you're doing public transportation, you're going to end up paying more in parking than you are for like the actual ticket, because the tickets are only like $10, but I think it's like 18 or 20 to park. So
I think that if you make a day, because I thought about that, if you mentioned that, I think if you made a day of going to parking there and going to even going to LACMA and the museum, then going to a movie, I think then
it'd be fine.
Would be reasonable.
Yeah,
because you're making a whole day of it. But yeah, otherwise that is kind of a pricey.
The carpooling in helps too.
Yeah, exactly.
Cars.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the museum's great. It was interesting to go this time because they had changed some stuff out since like the inaugural stuff they had, and then we found out that they're going to be doing some like Godfather exhibit like starting next month. So
yeah, that should be incredible.
I'm gonna have to go back and check that out too. But yeah, it's a great museum, especially if you're into film. Yeah, I can't recommend it higher.
Yeah, it's definitely a place that we could have probably spent even longer than we did, just sort of sticking around watching different clips and stuff. But while we're on the subject of movies, and before we get into, so I will, let you know, listener, that the theme of tonight's episode is actually Stephen King adaptations. So we will be discussing. Obviously, we won't be going to every single one of them because there's a lot. And we didn't really discuss.
I guarantee we're going to miss some people's favorites, but that's
absolutely.
Not. Yeah.
We never talked about whether or not we were going to be discussing both the actual films as well as the mini series. I don't know how we feel about that. This is a movie podcast and not a mini series television podcast, but we could mention them. But before we do that, Devin, I know we all had very strong feelings on a movie that you wanted to discuss before we actually got into tonight's topic.
Well, this has become something of a tradition for us too. And this is, well, in theory, the last year that we're going to be able to complete this tradition, because it's supposed to be the end. It's even in the title. But I was assuming that you guys probably had thoughts, as do I, about Halloween Ends. So, and it's not a Casey episode without some reference to John Carpenter, although Carpenter could potentially come up later too, because he did a Stephen King adaptation. But
You did.
Yeah, I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on Halloween Ends because frankly, as I was watching it, I was wondering, like I was trying to hear your guys' voice in my ear.
I will say this. More than half of my social media are horror fans and horror sites and horror reviewers and film reviewers. And there was a lot of the second it came out, even before it came out, there was a lot of discussion. And I have a tendency to be wary of especially immediate popular response, because I sometimes feel that there's a lot of, I don't know, hype, both good or bad, that sort of happens on social media, especially in the horror community. So I wanted to let it breathe a little bit and really sort of try to go in with as much of an open mind as possible. And I did. I tried to have an open mind as much as possible.
How'd that go?
I mean, I don't want to start this off as a huge tirade, so I'll keep this brief. But I have a tendency, especially when people hate something, it's a bad trend in all film, but specifically in genre films, or anything that's tied to an intellectual property that has a deep fan base or a history and a lot of love to it, is that people sometimes confuse a movie that didn't deliver what they wanted with a quote unquote bad movie. They mistake you. There's a lack of ability to actually intellectually critique a film on the merits of being a movie, as opposed to how it stacks up in the history of the film or in the canon of the film. And I think all movies are still movies and should be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and regardless of whether or not you liked what they did with the franchise, was it a good movie? And that's sort of where I went into it. And right away, I will say that, I'll try to be as spoiler free as possible, but as soon as it started, the opening scene, which I thought was actually phenomenal, I thought it was really well done. I thought they were trying to make a different point of view, or trying to make a different statement with what the message of the opening was, and about the trauma of horror film. Like, if horror movies were real, if Michael Myers was real, the real kind of lasting ramifications of experiencing something like that and what it would do to a community. And I thought that was really interesting. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting way to open the movie. And my immediate following thought, which unfortunately happened to be true, is, God, I hope we're not going to follow this kid as the main character. And that's exactly what we did. And then it was exactly like, please don't make this be what it ended up being, which I thought was sort of not necessarily bad, even for the Halloween franchise. I just thought it was really silly and kind of dumb and bad logic and bad reasoning. And then the movie itself is actually just really silly. So much, in so many ways, great actors, beautiful looking film. Again, all 3 films look incredible. Really good dialogue, even too. It's just the choices that were made. I don't understand it. And I'm trying not to go off on a hate-filled tirade as much as some of that's in there. But yeah, I was just honestly confused and really sort of, do I need to rewatch this? And then honestly, by the end of it, I wasn't even hate. I was just so over the movie halfway through. I'm like, this is not going to be a movie I probably end up rewatching a lot. Where even like Halloween Kills, which has a lot of issues, I feel like that one has at least enough meat on the bones and enough kind of about it that it might warrant revisits. I can see myself maybe rewatching Ends one more time to sort of really digest it and kind of separate myself from my first viewing of it. But I can predict it's not going to go any better than the first time.
Yeah. How about you, Casey? I think.
Yeah, I watched it last night. Yeah, just really not enjoyable for me. The whole thing with the text being the Halloween 3 style text. So it's like, oh, he's going to try something different, which they did, but it wasn't a good, pleasant thing to watch. And if you're going to do something completely different, you should have basically not had Michael Myers involved at all.
100%.
If you're going to truly go that route, then go all in.
It's the only reason the original part 3 even works, is because they went all in.
Right. Yeah. So if you're going to stray pretty far from what you set up, you need to go out into the fucking you need to go way left of field, because trying to do something different and then still incorporate Michael Myers into it and Laurie Strode, it doesn't work. The balance, like there's no balance with that. It's just distracting.
Agreed.
So yeah, you're trying to do this different thing, and like for the first like 55 minutes, that's what it is, and then finally Michael Myers shows up, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, and then the way they try to connect those two things, it's just like, what is this dumb shit? Like,
yeah, it is actually dumber than Curse of Michael Myers, and that's
that's saying something.
And so the way that it all plays out just like didn't work for me. And the thing about the second one, Halloween Kills, is like I had some big issues about that one, and there's probably not a lot of times I'll rewatch that one. But at least like the gory killing in that one was like fun to watch. Like
the kills were fantastic in that.
I mean, it's kind of the complete opposite of like what Carpenter started out to do initially, which because the original Halloween has like pretty much zero blood in it, But that was fun to watch for me. But like the story itself was not good. This was just like there wasn't really much. Like the opening scene, like you said, was awesome, and then like everything after, I'm just like, yeah, I don't care. So. But hats off to people who did like it, but I wasn't.
I have seen a lot of people try to bend over backwards to sort of justify decisions.
People have a hard time like digesting that something in a franchise they love is not good.
Yeah,
right. Phantom Menace was proof positive of that for me. Like when that shit all first went down, big learning lesson for me as far as fandom goes. It was just like, yeah, nothing's etched in stone as being perfect the way that you always perceive it to be. So.
And I feel like there's people that get off on just being critical of everything and negative. And I feel like there's also people on the inverse that there's people who are just apologists, whatever. They try to justify why this entry in their favorite film franchise is not as bad as everybody says it is. And I feel like, there's nothing wrong with being critical. There's nothing wrong with having a critical eye towards films, especially the ones that you actually like. And being able to even separate yourself, being like, look, it's not a great movie, but I still love it because but yeah, to try to justify this as a good movie is
a hard sell.
There's just too many like what moments where you're like, this doesn't make any goddamn bit of logical sense in a franchise that went off the rails 4 movies in. So I mean, Devin, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm pretty much in line with you guys. There was a part of me a couple of days afterwards that had to stop and think, is this something I'm going to be reevaluating in 10 years? Is this suffering the same fate as the original Halloween 3, where it was the most reviled and now it's kind of considered to be the best sequel? But I had to stop myself because like, no, it's not. Casey already pointed out, like, part of why Halloween 3 works is because they went a completely different direction. Yeah. And I can see what David Gordon Green, the director, is trying to do. It actually kind of, I think, draws some correlation to the latest Star Wars trilogy in the sense that the first one was just rehashing the original and in the spirit of the original. But to be more specific towards Halloween, you can see that Green took the second one to be the gorier, hospital-based sequel, which is what Halloween 2 originally was. And then Halloween 3, he took it a different direction and he had less Michael Myers. The difference is that Halloween 3 had 0 Michael Myers. And in fact, there's proof that it doesn't even take place in the same universe, because in one of the bars in Halloween 3, and there's Tom Atkins is a prolific drinker in Halloween 3, which I very much appreciate. But in a bar, there's a trailer for Halloween playing on TV. So Halloween exists as a movie in Halloween 3. It's not like down the street from Haddonfield. I held off full judgment on Halloween Kills because I wanted to see how Halloween Ends took it.
Same, yeah.
And here's the thing, it took it nowhere. This idea of like the supernatural, almost superhero style Michael Myers that left us at the end of Halloween Kills is suddenly back to being like 70-year-old Nick Castle moving tired through the sewerways. Like he's lost all of his superpowers, and I can't even tell if he's passing it on to Corey, the new bad guy. By the way, Corey Cunningham, as if like anybody, who knows even the smallest thing about slasher history doesn't see that obvious fucking. Like,
I I thought it was so stupid.
To kind of harken back to something I said in the last episode when we kind of went off on our tirade about how to critique films and how I recommend meeting a film halfway in order to like understand it. I met this film halfway and I still didn't like by meeting it halfway, I still did not approve of what it was. He did a bad job of trying to separate this from the rest of the movies. And Judy Greer dying now just seems like Judy Greer didn't want to do the third movie, and so they had to quick cut her out of it. Because it had no relevance to the rest of it. I mean, the victimization of the granddaughter of Laurie's granddaughter that could have been satisfied through Michael Myers returning to their town. Her boyfriend had already been killed. Her father had already been killed. The mother didn't also have to be killed to give her trauma. And the Mickey and Mallory Knoxing of those two was really just kind of embarrassing at a certain extent because I just didn't see it as being like when they were trying to make the story somewhat about how this guy was getting picked on, even though he was innocent of the crime that people thought he committed at the beginning of the movie. He went through a court of law. He was found innocent. We saw what happened in the movie, so we knew he was innocent. But the town was being really hard on him, and they were blaming him for the crime he was acquitted of. And there was a realism to that, and I wanted to see where that went. But I don't think that in real life that story goes towards the Corey character saying, "You know what? You guys are going to pick on me. I am going to start killing all y'all."
Well, so
because he wasn't the killer prior to that. Otherwise, the beginning means nothing. That he accidentally killed a child. Spoiler alert! If you haven't seen Halloween Ends yet. But
I was trying to steer away from spoilers, but
there's no such thing as a spoiler if it takes place in the first 10 minutes. If somebody's going to cry about that, fuck you. That's plot, not ending.
That's true. So to address a few points. One, the leap of logic to say not only that this kid that only appears in this movie, so we have no history to him. He has no history with the franchise. He's this character that comes in the third and final act, plays this huge role that ends up, again, not actually fucking going anywhere. There's already a lot of elements there I could pick apart. But the fact that her granddaughter, just all of a sudden, who's witnessed this terrible, the effects of Michael Myers is now going to go, it makes no sense. It's so fucking ham-fisted and forced. But here's my thing. If they had done it, I think the whole plot of the movie is that Michael Myers sort of inhabits, or like it's because they look at each other's eyes, and then from that point he suddenly becomes fucking, his sidekick is like murder his slasher apprentice. But there's no actual build to that. Like there's not even evidence that that's what happened. The problem was that Green did the laziest thing a filmmaker can possibly do. And I'm not saying that the trilogy is lazy or that he's a lazy filmmaker, but he made a very lazy choice because to leave certain things open-ended in a movie is fine. Like, did Mr. Pink live? That's a great question because you can debate and it means nothing to the plot. Is Corey possessed by the spirit of Michael Myers? That should be explicitly told to us if we're expected to swallow it. Yeah.
And it's not. He leaves it to interpretation. But that's not the artist's job to leave that part to interpretation. It's his job to tell us what it is.
There isn't enough meat on that bone to even justify that decision because it comes out of nowhere. It doesn't. It's never in the franchise. In this franchise with a lot of mythology that you can sort of pick from.
I mean, wouldn't Michael have given that to somebody in the mental hospital over the course of the 40 years he was in there?
Even if you were to draw the parallel between Corey and Michael was a psychopath from a kid. He was he was a soulless monster from childhood. This was a kid that was a good, smart kid with poor parents, and which he tried to make us feel bad for this kid who accidentally kills a kid. And even through it, all of the sheriff and other people like, oh, he was a good kid. I always thought he was a really good kid. Well, then there is literally no justification for him to all of a sudden. Also, he leaves this fucking clown mask at the bar. They never show him going back to get it. And then later on, when he starts killing people, he's got it again. I don't know why that bugged the shit out of me. And I don't know if there's but it's just like he literally abandons it at the goddamn at the bar
because Green ran out of benefit of the doubt. That's what happened. It's the type of thing where if the rest of the movie had been solid, and if it had actually, whether we liked the answers or not, if it at least answered some questions, then you wouldn't continue asking questions like that. And it's,
exactly.
It's a fair question. What the fuck was going on with the radio station too? Why was that such a big deal,
dude? And the weird. It's also the music for me. Sort of, it made me feel like a Rob Zombie, one of the Rob Zombie Halloween musics, with those sort of forced in music and stuff. It's a bad movie, and that's the thing that most upsets me is that David Gordon Green is a great. Watching early David Gordon Green movies, George Washington and All the Real Girls, like he's a phenomenal director and a phenomenal writer, and he's got such a good ear for human, like real dialogue and a unique voice that. There are some of that in here too. There are moments. There's dialogue that happens between Laurie Strode and I keep forgetting the name of the cop. The romance that's sort of there.
Yeah.
There's some really great humanistic moments between those two, and they're both great actors. So there's some moments that I'm like, oh, why couldn't we have more of this? Or why couldn't the rest of the movie be on this level of like.
Because he failed at the premise of what he set out to make. Because this was promised to be Laurie's art.
Yeah.
And Laurie doesn't show up till more than halfway through the first one, I believe. She's in the hospital and out of commission for like most of the second one. And then she's just kind of a doddering autobiography writing fool through most of this one. The fight at the end, yes. I'm finally like, hell yes, this is what I signed up for. But it was a long time to get to that 10 minutes. And
I actually thought it was really, I thought the way I'm all for them killing Michael Myers and even in brutal, kind of sadistic fashions, but it was like weirdly.
It was unwarranted. Like they didn't set up to make it. I mean, I guess they have over the course of all these movies to be like, yeah, he's got to go out this crazy, specific way, that's satisfying to everybody. But like the movie that they chose to do that in, it's like it was just seemed kind of gratuitous because it didn't seem like with the immediate story that it's applied to that it kind of justified anything. So
and it was the Laurie Strode from the first movie, and it was that ending tied to the first movie, and that was the only movie we got. We just got that version of David Gordon Green's sequel to the original franchise, original Halloween movie. It'd be great. I'd be like, fuck yeah, let's do it. Like that's great. I like it.
If he had died in the fire in the first one, with the Home Alone house, I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, because that was such a cool moment because you realize like how much forethought she had put into killing Michael Myers. After Halloween Kills, I was like, maybe really Halloween Ends is going to really do something really, really different and really fun and really smart, and it will really do something the rest of the franchise hasn't done. And in a way, I was kind of right because it did do. I mean, it went in directions the rest of the franchise hasn't really done, and it did do something different. But god damn it, it failed on every attempt at being. And the thing is, I've read quotes and stuff about like, well, they really wanted to do. Dave Gordon Green had like he wanted to like subvert expectations, all whatever the bullshit excuses. And I'm sorry, like you could have done all that and made a much better movie.
He failed at it. Yeah. Bottom line, he's a great filmmaker, and all filmmakers, great or otherwise, should be allowed to fail. So it's not going to keep me from seeing his Exorcist movies, although I am, a little bit worried about it. But I will see at least the first one. So nobody's credit should be spoiled by making a bad movie because people don't understand how hard it is to make any movie, good or bad. So I'm blaming him, but I'm not saying fuck that guy.
He made good movies. So
and he tried something interesting with this, but he failed. It was an unsuccessful thing.
This is what now? Part 11, part 12 of this.
If you count the zombie movies, it's number 13. So it got there before Friday the 13th.
Yeah. So it's just, everybody wants to see a good movie, but at the same time, it's like, how is part 13 of anything going to be like, they finally got it,
Well, I think what pisses me off, though, why I feel like it's so disappointing is I've gone on record as saying this and I've gotten flack from people for it, but I think the Halloween franchise is actually mostly terrible.
Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4 good ones, and good being subjective to begin with.
Yeah,
but the rest of them are terrible.
Yeah,
like,
the first three are the only ones I revisit, and like the fourth one's like kind of funny to me because of the ending. But after that, I'm just like, to this day, I've still never seen the zombie ones.
I will say
there's not a whole lot of need, but they were interesting. They were good for discussion at the time.
I truly love Zombies Halloween 2 because it is batshit crazy. The fact that it was like, oh, you didn't like my first Halloween movie? Everything you hated about the first one, I'm going to ramp up to 11 in the second one.
I actually respected that too. I liked it better.
Yeah. And it's crazy. It's just like, it's a fun horror movie. And like, there's some great kills. It's funny. It's real. It's very zombie.
It's the most fucked up of the Halloween movies of the entire franchise. There's no walking away feeling good about that one.
No.
But that's kind of the point. And again, exactly. That's meeting the filmmaker halfway. And I met the filmmaker halfway with Green, and he didn't meet me the rest of the halfway. Before we close off from it, though, I do want to point out he had a statement. I don't know. Statement makes it sound like it was official. He mentioned it in an interview that there was originally going to be a stinger at the end that wasn't necessarily calling for more sequels, but it did bring up something that I was hoping would be brought up in this movie. And that was going to be at the end. It was going to show the making of Silver Shamrock masks. And it was going to show the three classic pumpkin, witch, and skull. And then there was going to be a fourth Silver Shamrock mask. And it was going to be the Michael Myers mask. So the implication being that Silver Shamrock had been behind this from the beginning. And that the original mask that he stole in the first movie would have been a Silver Shamrock. That maybe had been discontinued for other reasons, like once the first Halloween takes place. But that's what I was really wanting with this one. I was like, fuck Michael Myers, bring back Silver Shamrock if you're gonna do a callback. But yeah, I was disappointed that Halloween Kills had more references to Silver Shamrock than this one did, and this one was supposed to be following the lead of Halloween Season of the Witch.
Yeah, and I did not hear that, but goddamn, that would have almost saved the movie for me, just because of what it adds to the mythology and incorporates that, and again, they already incorporate the masks into Halloween Kills, but like have the Silver Shamrock specifically. Before we close, two things too. One, it's weird though, because there is, with the whole Corey thing, there is sort of like, because again, Danielle Harris in part 4 was the illusion that she was a killer, blah, blah, blah. So I thought maybe there would be more tied into that portion, but no subtle, it was so shitty. The whole thing was so shitty. But two, we didn't really go off on the tirade of how goddamn dumb it was for Sewer Michael Myers. And I have a theory now. If you're going to incorporate a sewer character, the character has to live in this, like they have to be a turtle, they have to be alligator, they have to be, tied into the sewer. That has to be their natural home. Because if you try to work and they live in the sewers after, it's just stupid. You can create a sewer dwelling killer, and as long as that's the origin of the killer or the character, they'll always let you tie them to the sewer. That's fine. If you try to shoehorn any other character now he lives in the sewer, it's just goofy and stupid, and it's almost pathetic. Like, I get, like, where is Michael Myers when he's hiding? Don't show him living in a sewer like a homeless guy. Like, that's just goofy. Like, it's just he's all dirty, stinky Mike Myers. It's just
even Jason, who is considerably more disabled than Michael, was able to build himself a hut in the woods.
Exactly.
And managed to not be found.
And like, oh God,
by magic.
There's too much stupid to go into.
But, yeah. but when Friday the 13th Part 2 is smarter than Halloween Kills in terms of how it deals with its hiding serial killer, that's kind of sad.
Yeah. On that note, we're about 50 minutes into this podcast. Let's get into the actual topic. So this could be a
Happy
very
Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Full disclaimer: Stephen King had nothing to do with Halloween Kills.
But man,
we don't want to get sued for slander. So.
He does want to make a Jason story, though. You've heard about that, right? I know I've talked to James about that, but have you ever heard about that, Casey?
No, I haven't actually.
Stephen King has said that he would never be able to write it because of all the legal morass that the character is in. Which now that that's more or less cleared up, we'll see. But he says that he has always wanted to write a novel from Jason Voorhees' perspective And he's like, and it will make you cry. It will make you cry for Jason. I want to write the human Jason that tells his story, that reveals who his father was, why all this was going on.
So Stephen King wants to Cobra Kai Friday the 13th.
Essentially.
Hey, I'm here for it. Like
I'll watch it.
That's got my curiosity.
Yeah. So let's hope that happens someday. But yeah, as far as Stephen King, I'm gonna fully reveal I did not do the same amount of research that I would normally do for a deep dive because I wanted this to be more of a loose conversation. I mean, I've got fun facts, as I'm sure you guys do too. But for those of you who are wanting a fully comprehensive Stephen King episode, we would probably have to do a 4-parter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're gonna go over some of our favorite Stephen King movies. We haven't
be highlights
this
kids.
before. Yeah. You're probably going to be dealing with a lot of stuff from the 80s and the 90s and fewer of the things now. That probably disappoints almost nobody in our audience because I've seen our demographics.
And in the case of me, it's definitely going to be more movie heavy than TV stuff. It's like I've seen some of the TV series. I mean, it probably being the most memorable one for me, but like there's been so many adaptations, and like sadly a lot of them didn't get like a lot of good reviews, and so I just like, oh, I guess I don't need to see that.
I will go on record as saying I feel like some of them get bad raps, and we'll go into that more.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to judge because I haven't seen them, but I think that's initially why I stayed away from some of them, though.
Since this is a Halloween episode, and we'll be leaning into the horror, obviously it will go without saying that, yes, Stand By Me is fantastic. Yes, obviously Shawshank Redemption is a masterpiece and a film I'm grateful for personally because it's the only way anybody ever knows how to pronounce my last name. But Dolores Claiborne, blah blah. We won't really be. If you were listening to this podcast, really hoping to hear our thoughts on Shawshank Redemption, we'll save that for a future episode, maybe a Morgan Freeman or Tim Robbins episode, or Frank Darabont, which I would definitely be into that. So. Let me ask you. We'll start with. Let me ask this question to start with, to kind of kick this off. Do you have a personal? When anybody ever says Stephen King adaptation, do you have one that always comes to mind, or a particular favorite?
Yes, but there's 3 answers and they're all different.
Okay, let's hear them.
Okay, well, just listing off the movies, but not going into them. The first thing that pops into my mind is The Shining because that was my first. Not the full uncut. I saw it on KCOP, but The Shining, which also because it's ironically not a good adaptation of King, even though it's a brilliant movie.
Yeah.
Pet Sematary because that was my favorite for a very long time. When I was growing up, when I was 10 years old, was when that movie came out, and that really made it for me. And for the life of me, I'm having a hard time thinking of the third one now. I think it was Creepshow because Creepshow is the most fun, and it's a not an adaptation; it's an original.
Yeah, I mean that we'll get into that, because there are some films that aren't actually adaptations. I know one of Casey's favorite movies isn't an adaptation; it's an original screenplay. So, with that said, Casey, do you have any specific favorites or anything when somebody says Stephen King adaptation or whatever that comes to mind?
Well, sadly, the first thing in my demented mind that comes to mind is Maximum Overdrive, because
that's fair.
It's the only movie he ever directed.
Yep.
But it is based on Trucks, which was a short story, right?
Yes, which actually has its own adaptation that's fucking terrible.
It does not need to be seen. In it, right?
What's up?
Timothy Busfield from Revenge of the Nerds. Although I'm sure he prefers I say 30-something.
Yeah, so
Revenge of the Nerds.
Maximum Overdrive is just crazy and fun. It's not a movie that you would expect Stephen King to written, let alone direct.
Yeah.
Compared to like other stuff he's done, but it's so silly and fun to me that I just love it. I've got a framed poster of it. And also the original It really kind of stands out for me, like that. Since I had access to that, it was on TV, and like how creepy it was, despite that, really stood out to me. And like Tim Curry was just like horrifying. Pet Sematary was big for me. I saw that in the theater first run and scared the hell out of me. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many like even if they're not great, they're always at least interesting. And it's always interesting to see like what people do with his material. But the biggest thing, like, there's just a lot that, like, I think on the endings they just kind of putter out, and that's actually kind of a criticism on King himself. Like,
yeah, that's par for the course.
I mean,
I will say, I think that is a kind of it's become sort of a.
It seems like his MO.
Yeah, well, it's become very popular to sort of lobby that his way.
And it's kind of unfair for me to say, because like it's not like I've read a ton of his books. I mean, I mostly read certain ones when I was younger, like certain key ones. But
I think a lot of the film adaptations specifically, I think one of the most notorious is how bad the Stand TV miniseries, how bad the ending comes across in that medium. And again, the ending of the original miniseries is goofy as it appears on the screen, but there's a different, again, what's a whole, I have strong feelings on the subject, so I won't go too far into it. But yes, we could spend this entire podcast going over Stephen King's themes and the things he does well versus the things that he sort of kind of themes he continues to go the same well over and over again. But there's definitely, I think when Stephen King is at his strongest, you can definitely feel the Stephen King. It's like you don't even have to see if you watch a good adaptation of Stephen King from start to finish, you don't need to know where it's from to know, wow, this was probably a Stephen King story. Because there are character types, there are themes, there are relationships he explores over and over again. With all that said, though, personally, I would definitely say if I were to argue my favorite Stephen King adaptation, it's actually Silver Bullet for two reasons. Is it the best movie? I mean, I would never argue that, although I could make a few cases.
You can make a case for that. I mean, I don't like the effects, but or actually the effects are fine. I don't like the werewolf.
See, I do like the werewolf, but I totally understand.
But the rest of the movie is amazing.
But I think the number one thing is like, I read Cycle of the Werewolf, in junior high, and I literally read it at a time when I was starting to get into Stephen King and Dean Koontz, which it's become very popular to shit on Dean Koontz, and I totally get it. But it was just really formative to me, and all the illustrations by Bernie Wrightson still are incredible. Bernie Wrightson drawing werewolves is, that's porn to me.
I read a werewolf movie because of Bernie Wrightson's werewolves.
And as you should.
And maybe that's why I don't like the werewolf in Silver Bullet, because the werewolf in Cycle of the Werewolf was Bernie Wrightson.
And it was so perfect. But with that said, I think one of the reasons I love it so much, besides the fact it's just a really fun movie, with a great villain with Everett McGill, and again, Gary Busey and Corey Haim, like such a product of his time. But the reason I love it so much is that if you've ever read a Stephen King book, it literally captures Stephen King's the written word so perfectly, the vibe, the atmosphere, the humor / heart of it / the sort of creepiness aspects of it. It feels very authentic to Stephen King's voice. No, that's not saying I would never say it's the most faithful or whatever, and that's a whole other conversation. But
no, but it comes pretty close, and I'll say, and this isn't the director whose name escapes me right now. He never directed again. It's his one and only feature. He did.
Dan Attias, I think his name was.
Yes, you're right. I should know that because I met him once.
I only know that because I just watched Silver Bullet for the first time 2 nights ago.
Oh, cool.
Oddly enough, yeah. And I've owned it for years, is what's even sadder.
Then I've got some questions for you next. But
okay.
Let's go ahead and start with Silver Bullet. But then I'd like to come back to Maximum Overdrive after that.
Well, we'll talk about all these because
we're going to go full circle on a lot of
yeah. When anybody brings up Maximum Overdrive and has the fucking audacity to say it's a terrible movie, I want to throat chop them. It's such a fucking bullshit. I'm repeating a popular opinion, especially compared to Stephen King's other adaptations. Yeah, it's wacky, but it's the characters are well written, they're well acted. The plot has a very understandable plot, even if the concept is weird and some of the mechanics don't make sense of Anyways,
we'll get into that in a minute. But
the other movie
I just wanted to say about Silver Bullet, it's based on a novella. When you're doing an adaptation based on a novella or a short story, you have more freedom to A, tell the story more accurately, and B, expand upon it yourself and make it more of your own piece of work. Whereas when you're telling some of the epics, which is why there's so many Stephen King miniseries out there, is because he's a prolific writer and he's written very long books. But yeah, I think Silver Bullet is a really good, accurate representation of Cycle of the Werewolf because it was short and because they were able to turn it into this tight, like 90-minute movie.
Exactly, 100%. And I mean, before we get too much, I want to go on record as saying I actually think Stephen King works better in the short story format. It's why so many of his very successful films have come from his short stories, not just because of the actual mechanics of adapting a short story to a feature-length film as opposed to a novel, but the freedom that Stephen King has been able to take with his short stories. He writes different styles of characters. He doesn't always write likable heroes in the short stories. Sometimes his antagonists are kind of dickheads, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. And I think, like I said, he explores different themes and stuff, and I feel like he frees himself up some. But real quick, the two other things that always come to mind, I would be lying if I said that the original It miniseries isn't my definitive Stephen King work for me. I don't care. I enjoy the remakes for what they are. I think Bill Skarsgård did an incredible job. I think the first one is I actually just rewatched it today. I think the first one is still very successful, but I think it's timing, the fact that I grew up with it, the fact that I love Tim Curry, but just it works so perfectly for what it is. And I love it. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I still love the visuals of the Stephen King miniseries. The other one that really automatically always comes to mind, and I'm always surprised that it's not always up in other people's mind of our same age, because I think I was that perfect age when it came out, and it was still very, very new, was Salem's Lot. First off, fucking still terrifies me. The Barlow makeup, the very Nosferatu makeup, inspired makeup, is still fucking disturbing and scary.
Reggie Nalder's a weird-looking guy without the makeup. So.
Yes, exactly.
That was smart casting.
It just, I think it's so perfect for what it is. I've actually I've purposely never seen the Rob Lowe remake.
I've never seen any of the remakes of the miniseries, but I've seen some of the old miniseries.
I've heard it's pretty decent, but I have just never done it because I just hold on to that original miniseries. It's so, and again, some people think I grew up with it, so something that's in my head. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's so slow. Barlow's only in it for like a minute of full screen time.
It's the
people
town.
Don't understand.
It's the town. Yeah, exactly. It's a mystery.
Exactly. So, but that's a whole other thing that we'll go into. But those are
it's got Hutch in it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into this though, because obviously you wanted to talk more about Maximum Overdrive, and then I think you also said you wanted to talk more specifically about Cycle of the Werewolf / Silver Bullet.
Well, I'm dying to know what Casey has to say about this, because this is also a big Busey moment, and I know that Casey's got some feelings on that.
Yeah, I really liked it actually. I do think, whether you want to say it's a trope of Stephen King or not, I did think it kind of puttered out a little bit at the end. Not that it was necessarily a bad ending, but I thought it could have been a little bit more, could have had a little bit more oomph to it.
It was a little anticlimactic, like it comes in and they
considering because there were scenes earlier that kind of were like, they were like, oh, that was a cool scene, and yeah, I don't think the wolf effects were like on par with like say like The Howling or American Werewolf in Paris. Or American Werewolf in London.
Oh, fuck that.
Oh, whoa. My God. Fucking blasphemous. American Werewolf.
The only movie that was better that we saw without its effects than we actually saw.
When the three of us saw American Werewolf in Paris, we saw it without the effects and appreciated it.
Yeah, it was
the funnest nights of our lives.
It was actually entertaining. And then
that's a story for another podcast.
But no, American Werewolf in London and Howling, I think definitely had like more convincing and cooler like werewolf effects. But I still like, it's still very much 80s, but I still thought it was really cool effects, and the way the story played out, like I had no issues. I like the combo of Busey and Haim together. Like I thought the relationship was oddly like charming.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect,
very.
Here's these two like really big kind of, Busey's like a huge personality, but like, kind of Corey Haim's doing his thing too. And it's just like, it's an odd combo, but it works.
Did they meet through their dealer? Is that?
Oh, shit.
Sorry.
So I'm going to go on record as saying early Corey Haim, like obviously Silver Bullet and Lucas, he was one of the most likable.
He was a really good child actor.
He had a lot of promise.
Sweet. Yeah, absolutely. But he was so sweet and he was such a likable kid, which is sad how everything played out. But
I mean, poor kid is the poster child for how that shit doesn't work out. And when I did see, what was his name again? Casey, the guy who I saw speak, the director of Silver Bullet.
Oh, Dan Attias or Attias? Attais, I think is what his name.
Because I saw it when the Arrow Theater, the American Cinematheque, had a werewolf triple feature, and it was American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and Silver Bullet. So there was no way I wasn't going.
No, yeah, that's required viewing.
And he happened to be in the audience for his own movie, so they talked him into going up for a Q&A. And this will give you an idea for the time of it. He actually said, and it kind of made the audience go hush for a second, but he's like, thinking back on it, it was probably not the best idea to have Gary Busey introduced to Corey Haim at all. And he didn't know, like there are no stories that one corrupted the other or anything like that. In fact, all evidence points to Corey Haim hanging out with Jake Busey behind the scenes quite a bit. But within days of him making that comment was when Haim passed away, and it hit really hard after that.
Oh man.
So if I sounded glib, I mean that's sorrow plus time. Making that comment about their dealers. But
I will say, like, a person my age watching this movie now, like not having grown up with it, I still think it holds up despite, it's very much something that's a product of 1985 when it came out. But like it's still like, I'm like, if I had watched this over the years, this would be something I would rewatch a lot, and I probably will from now on. Like, and so so the fact that like I could discover it now at like my age and still think, yeah, this is good, entertaining, it's rewatchable despite how old it is. Like, I think that says a lot about it.
And that to me, and that's why I will always I'll defend Stephen King from his detractors for this purpose specifically. What makes the movie so good or so works so well is that at the end of the day, it's still about the relationships between the characters. And even the relationship with the sister is very complicated because obviously there's an antagonistic relationship because, again, he's the annoying little brother. He's basically cockblocking her all the time. But because Stephen King understands family dynamics and he understands that like things aren't black and white and that there is a love there and like she really does. It's just real. Like they don't get along, but there's love there, and like between the mother and her brother, the fucking insane Gary Busey. And Gary Busey is just so goddamn likable. The character's not that likable like I'm sure if you read the script, Gary Busey added 95% of the role, just being himself.
He improvised heavily and credit to Busey. I mean, for what a fuckhead he is. He brought life to the role and makes, like, you're right, nobody else would have been likable in that role as well. Actually, until I did read this today, and I just suddenly remembered this. There is one other actor who was considered, and he might have made Uncle Red likable, but John Candy was
Candy. I didn't know that, but as soon as you started saying it, I was like, it must be John Candy. Literally, I didn't know that it had only been John Candy. And yes, I agree. I mean, he's basically Uncle Buck. He would Uncle Bucket. So
yeah, but
yeah, I mean,
I'll also say about the effects real quick. The kind of werebear look of the werewolf that was created by Carlos from Baldy, who has done some other really impressive work like E.T. And Possession, which is a favorite of ours. But I think that he kind of was working uphill with this one because I think De Laurentiis was the one who wanted a person in a suit. And so it kind of had to be a little clunky. But I think the reason why it sticks out as particularly bad is because that dream sequence in the church was so fucking scary with all of them turning into werewolves. Every werewolf in that room, in that church, in that dream sequence was scarier looking than what the werewolf actually ended up being.
There's kind of a reason for that, and that's because someone else did that scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I was watching the Shout Factory disc last night, and I was like, oh, what's this got for like special features? And I was watching the featurette on two of the makeup guys. So basically, Rambaldi was the one responsible for all like the main Everett McGill stuff. But then they called these other two guys in from another company to do that church sequence because, there were so many applications they were going to have to do and stuff. And so those guys did that church scene, and all the other like stuff with the main werewolf was all like Carlo Rambaldi.
Damn, should have been.
I've actually gone on record on publicly before that It doesn't matter what movie. That dream sequence goes down as my favorite werewolf related movie scene of all time. It's so fucking creepy. And first off, before we stop talking about this movie, once again, I have to point out Everett fucking McGill, who is so underrated just as a actor. I can't think of another person that could have played that role like he did. He's so even as a before the reveal, even though it's right from the dream sequence, it's pretty obvious what's going on. But he's so creepy just as a preacher in a patch. I was like, I don't even need to see a werewolf. This motherfucker scares me more than the werebear or whatever it is. Werebear. I will go on record saying I don't hate. I kind of like. I think maybe it's childhood. I do think maybe it's a little bit of nostalgia, just because first off, man in suit always beats CGI.
Yeah, I'm not saying CGI would be the alternative.
No, but I'm saying like it's goofy, but I still kind of enjoy it. And I think because you just it looks like it still looks. It's goofy looking, but it still looks like it's a. Anyways, but the movie has a souped up wheelchair that it's like it's the
silver bullet itself is a supercharged wheelchair that is so highly inappropriate to give a child, but so cool. It's
cool.
It's like some fucking Tim the Toolman Taylor fucking creation. It's like if he had wrote it, he would have crashed into like a fucking wall, and like Al would have been like, "Oh, Tim."
Definitely shouldn't have been writing it. Gary Busey, as we all know.
Oh, no.
Sorry, I had to. It wrote itself.
Yeah, hey, what are you doing getting motorcycle advice from Gary Busey for? Don't let him build your motorcycle, for God's sake.
So I do want to. So I want to get this one over from the bed, because I do think it's the one that everybody. It's always going to be the top of the best Stephen King films. Well, also, as Devin has already stated, is notoriously Stephen King's least favorite adaptation because of how much has changed. But, inarguably, probably the film with the best pedigree. That's The Shining. And let's talk about it. Have either of you guys read the novel?
Multiple times. They stand alone in my heart. One of my favorite movies of all time. One of my favorite books of all time. The parts that do overlap are great. The parts that don't overlap are great. I don't even hate the McGarris TV miniseries remake. I think it was hokey, and I think the special effects weren't there at the time to really make like the topiary animals come to life. And I think Kubrick was very wise to scrap the topiary animals because they were in the original script. And I think they may have even have shot tests, if not actual footage, with the topiary animals coming to life before he said, no, fuck it, let's just make it a hedge maze. And the hedge maze in and of itself was brilliant.
Brilliant.
Jack Nicholson was my favorite movie star growing up. I still say he's my favorite movie star, but I am absolutely willing to accept that there's a lot of nostalgia tied up into that. It's an automatic response for me to just be like, oh yeah, Jack Nicholson, he's the best. But he's so fun in this. The movie itself is so funny, and you're not supposed to be laughing at it, but yet at the same time, you're totally supposed to be laughing at it. It's cruel, but it is funny. The whole bit about him freaking out that his wife was interrupting his writing. It's abuse. It's disgusting if it's happening in real life, but I'm sorry, it's hysterical if it's Jack Nicholson in a 1980s Stanley Kubrick movie. But yeah, the Shining holds a very special place in my heart, and always will, both in film and novel form. What about you guys?
Yeah, I've read it. I think that goes without saying. I'm the exact same way. I can divorce myself from how different it is from the novels. I think Stephen King, it's the one thing where I'm like, Stephen King has lost any kind of or objectivity, where it's like, yeah, I get that it's not the story that you envisioned, but this is still like an amazing film on its own. The cast is incredible. Shelley Duvall could not have been more perfectly cast, but we don't need to talk about Kubrick's treatment of Shelley Duvall. I feel like
we can call it out as shitty. I don't think it's responsible directing, and I've gone on record before as saying Stanley Kubrick is in no way as good of a director as everyone thinks Stanley Kubrick is, but only because nobody is that good of a director, and nobody should ever, based on their artistic right to deliver the right material. Nobody ever has the right to treat anybody in their cast and crew. Yeah. I don't know that Kubrick was a piece of shit. I've heard stories where he's a really cool guy. He was just very obsessive about his work, and I think that shit, thankfully, has passed out of fashion, and we just need to hang a lantern on it on Kubrick and forever say what a brilliant filmmaker who did lots of wrong things.
I mean, there are tons of great filmmakers who notoriously did the same thing. Friedkin and Coppola.
We would have to destroy so much of film history if we got rid of everybody who did something. I'm not talking about the Weinsteins of the world.
No.
But Kubrick pushed Shelley Duvall too far, and I'm sure everyone in our audience knows exactly what we're talking about.
But with that said,
but God, she did a great job. She shreds the role.
She is. I go on record as saying she is in my top 3 favorite. She's so underrated. She's never. Every time she's in something, she is so weird looking that she could have been typecast. Or I have the utmost admiration for Shelley Duvall as an actual actress. I think she was so great in this, and the humanity that she brought, and like that woman on the edge, which again, anyways, I don't want to talk about the onset stuff, but just as her, I feel like she could have gotten there without the abuse, because if you've seen her in other things, you know that she's definitely capable of that performance. But anyways, great movie, Scatman Crothers.
Yes,
what a great! I mean, the cinematography. Like I said, it goes without saying. It's been talked about enough. I will say that the documentary Room 237 is kind of bullshit, and every time anybody brings it up, I get a little angry because it's a lot. There's about 20% interesting and then about 80% horse shit in that movie.
Well, he doesn't need to. I've met the guy who made that too, and he was a nice enough guy, and I get where he was coming from. I think he lends too much credibility to the arguments. I think it's more of a showcase of look at how nutty people are about this movie, and not a matter of do any of these people are they actually onto something? That was the wrong approach. And he may not have gotten that many people to talk to him if his approach had been look how nutty this is. Yeah. But I think that there's a medium in there.
Yeah, and I think there are 2 people in it. I think there's 2 I remember that were like, okay, they're like logical and educated, and they're making interesting points. The rest of people are fucking huge leaps of logic and really just seeing shit that's not there, and it was really irritating. But again, that's not necessarily even. It's just I hate conspiracy theories to begin with. I think the conspiracy theorists are people with little brains who think they have giant brains, and it just drives me crazy. But that's a personal thing. Casey, what about you? What is your opinion and history with the Shining?
So, unfortunately, me being the literary Philistine, I have not read The Shining, the book. I've seen the movie plenty of times. Kubrick is, despite the issues of the way he worked, is one of my favorite directors, because more so just the work he put out, not necessarily the ways he achieved them.
And to be fair, he wasn't doing like Jack Nicholson was fine, Danny Lloyd was fine. It was that he felt that Shelley Duvall needed that for her role,
right?
But it's not like he was doing that on the set of Barry Lyndon also, or like he was pushing her that way because of the role, not because he is that way to everybody.
Abusive.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to like lock down Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman like a year if you're a complete fucking like just horrible human being to work for. So yeah, like the situation with him and Shelley was unfortunate. As far as the movie goes, I mean, I think as far as his Stephen King's horror adaptations, it's kind of the top. I mean, as far as, because it's such a huge, filmmaker that's doing it, despite how much he strays from the source material. But yeah, the movie is just creepy. There's so many just images in that movie and dialogue and situations that just stick with you, and it's still really creepy after all these years. It still works. It's just a masterpiece as far as filmmaking goes. I mean, if you're a astute King fan who has issues with how it was adapted, I mean, that's absolutely fair. Since I didn't read the book and I'm just coming from it as a movie, I think
as you should, and
I be legitimate. Yeah, like that's the way we should come after everything.
I agree 1,000%. I feel like, especially these days with nerd culture, and I was part of that. I was a guy that loved comic books and shit, and would see them adapt and get my panties in a bunch, because I would be like, how dare they change his costume? As I've matured and becoming a goddamn adult, I've been able to completely separate that idea, and just a work of art must stand on its own. And the thing that made that such a successful adaptation had nothing to do with whether or not it was a good adaptation of the book. It was that story needed the ambiguity to work. That's why I think a strict adaptation of The Shining could never really work, because there's
It's
so
all
much
metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just so
it's going to be hokey.
Exactly. And you put so much into that story that it's like it works as a novel, but it should never try to be a faithful adaptation. Where Kubrick was able to cherry pick the things about the story that were interesting and leave enough visual cues that made you go, what the fuck did I just see? Or what does that mean? That's why it works as a film and why it's so successful. But he gave you all these really striking images that half tells the story or kind of give you glimpses into the madness of this hotel, that you create the movie in your head. And that's really where it becomes successful, is in your own mind. You don't need to know the backstory of like the dog suits and like, it doesn't matter. You read the book and you get more, but Kubrick understood that's not what the movie is there for. The movie gives you enough that, you get so intrigued by what you're given that just the little glimpses of the small amounts that you're given, you're already you're already writing that in your head of what that could mean.
To that point, Kubrick even shot a scene, an attic scene. There's a whole sequence in the book that takes place in the attic where Jack is up there going through like the history of the Overlook and looking through. There's like a scrapbook with all the like news articles, and you learn who the woman in the tub is and the story behind the bear suit that everyone says is a dog suit, or maybe it wasn't.
Vice versa,
but anyways, like what's going on in that scene, and like a lot of the ghosts have their own stories, and he shot that scene and it's not there, so he went with it and ultimately decided it was better to not have it there, probably correctly.
And I think that's why true horror works. Ambiguity is so important to horror. Horror is a genre, whether it's written, whether it's film, whatever, is that it's that philosophy, that Lovecraftian philosophy, that like the horrors that you are able to sort of vaguely create in your head, the ideas, the less concrete, amorphous ideas of what is scary to you will never be beaten by a practical fact, by a sentence, because you have this sort of primal animalistic understanding of what fear is and what you find scary, and it's all brain chemistry and influence. So great horror leaves enough ambiguity there for you to imply things. And that's why, like, even though I love like really like gory horror movies and splatter films and stuff, they're not scary because they're crosses over into silliness. Even the like really hardcore films, anytime there's over gratuity or like where you see the monster, it stops being genuinely scary and becomes popcorn.
On the note of being scary, I heard something really interesting on a podcast that I wanted to bring up to you guys because I figured you guys could probably relate. This was actually on the canon, and I believe it was Jeff Garlock who was saying it, which is a great podcast if anybody gets a chance. He was they've been doing a whole run of John Carpenter movies this month in honor of Halloween, and he was pointing out nothing really scares him, or something that does truly scare him is so rare because he watches so many scary movies. And I know that the three of us can relate to this. Sure. It takes a lot to scare us. And sometimes that a lot is not, it's so over the top that it's not even pleasurable because it's so much to get us there. But he says what he looks for is not for a movie to scare him, because jump scares will always make you jump. That's a guttural, that's an instinctual reaction. But what actually gives you dread, he says, I don't look for a movie to scare me. I look for a movie that's going to stress me the fuck out.
Yeah.
And The Shining stresses me the fuck out, the same way that The Thing stresses me the fuck out. They don't scare me, but they really stress me the fuck out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always said it from like a movie that I have, and one movie I will talk about tonight actually is one of those rare instances of things that just do kind of unnerve me a little bit, just a broad concept. But I want things that get under my skin a little bit, where I'm not like terrified, but they're like, there's something unnerving about. Cronenberg's really great at that, where it's like concepts or things where you're like, oh, I would hate for that to be real or for that to happen. But yeah, absolutely. And again, Kubrick didn't make horror movies, but he really understood what was fucking scary to people. And that's the thing. That's why it's so successful. I feel like while we're talking about these, we should probably talk about, first off, the novel that made him famous, his first novel, and to this day, one of the top 5 best adaptations of his work, and that's Carrie.
Based on a short book again, by the way.
Yep. the reason that Carrie and anybody and the Carrie remake, the one with Chloe Moretz, I remember like I was like, okay, it's fine, you know, it's I don't hate it. The Carrie to the right, like I've seen all of those movies. There's something so perfect about, and it's not the most faithful per se, but not that it's not. It again, that's hard. I'm gonna stop saying that because it's so hard with King, anyways, or any adaptation. But regardless, everything about the De Palma Carrie works. Whether it's the incredible, you know, portrayal of Carrie, her mother, the tacked on ending, which some people hate, I think still is the greatest, whatever you want to call it. Like
King actually says it's the ending for the movie is better than the ending of the book.
Yeah, and I agree, and I feel like that will also come up on this podcast later. That idea that there are actually been a few things where they actually improved upon King's work, but it's so great, and I feel like over the years, there are like Cujo doesn't get as much love, and Christine doesn't get as much love. I think those concepts are a little bit less scary these days. Oh, a car is killing you, or you're a dog. It's like this, comparing it to like this, the Shining or it or whatever. It's like they're not high concepts. It's like very like it's a killer dog with rabies, or the car is trying to kill you. Like how just go inside a building. It's so stupid, like on paper. But both of those are great movies. Christine, you know, obviously directed by Carpenter. Cujo, one of his actual scariest adaptations. It's actually terrifying.
King
it doesn't sound like it's going to be scary.
Yeah.
But
King claims that Dee Wallace was better in that movie than any other actor in any adaptation. And he said this after Kathy Bates won an Oscar for Misery.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to say that whole, and the kid from, it feels so bad because you know,
Danny Pintaro.
Yeah. He's so great in it too. And your heart really, you're terrified for that kid, but great fucking movie. But again, it doesn't hold our imagination the way that later Stephen King films have, or you know, his novels. But they're great, and I feel like if you're getting into Stephen King work, you should definitely start at Christine and work your way up because it starts you off right. Great cast, my other favorite actress, just a great movie, great direction. The supporting cast is great. Just a really successful adaptation. Understands it's all about the fear of being an outcast. It's about that scary time between adolescence and adulthood. It's about repression. It's about there's all these big themes that King will kind of revisit, but it's just so what a great entry into the world that was for Stephen King. And again,
I think one of the reason it works so well too, I mean, aside from the fact that it's just masterfully done, masterfully shot, masterfully written, but also Brian De Palma was not carrying the baggage of being Brian De Palma yet. Stephen King had not, had an adaptation yet, or a hit in the book world yet. So there was no weight to Stephen King, and there was no weight to Sissy Spacek yet. So you have these three like dynamos of what they do, achieving at the top of their game of what they did, and it all just kind of came together. But it was able to come together because nobody expected anything from a movie.
Expectations,
a girl going through high school and having a hard time of it, and being emotionally abused at home and being bullied at school, and these were themes that were periphery in some ways to other movies, but were never front and center. And we actually get to see, like, whether you want to call Carrie the victim or the villain of this story, you get to see the progression of both as it goes on, and it's a masterstroke.
I want to write a book called Sympathy for the Devil, and literally where it's literally explores that concept of rooting for the monster, which wasn't a concept that was really a thing. Carrie was one of the first examples of blurring the lines between an antagonist and a protagonist, because at the end of the day, she's a killer. She's justified.
I would say Frankenstein's monster was maybe the first, but okay, it's a rarity.
Yeah, but see, that is played so like if you're talking about the novel specifically too, there is no, like, at the end of the day, the book is very clear that Dr. Frankenstein is the monster, that he should never have meddled with the science and is, blah, blah, blah.
But I'm talking about James Whale.
Well, but still, exactly. But that's one of those examples where even in the James Whale thing, like, Frankenstein he didn't ask to exist, and he doesn't kill, Carrie is she is a murdering she explicitly murders a fucking prom full of people out of anger, but you're rooting for her. Frankenstein's misunderstood, and he because of his appearance, and he was created life, and he didn't ask to be like. There's more understandable sympathy there, where it's like, well, yeah, you feel bad for this thing, Where Carrie is like, you're rooting for her to kill these idiots, all these bullies, but at the end of the day, you're like, fuck, that's fucked up. I should not be rooting for her. It's a great concept, and I think also too, which it needs to be said, there are very few, even to this day, there are very few female monsters, female lead monsters. There is still in 2022, it is a rarity. And it's just such a great, it's funny, I have read the original story. I haven't read it probably in 20 years. And when I was thinking about the movies I want to talk about, I'm like, I need to reread that story because
same.
Yeah, and it's like, it's definitely a scenario where I feel like as I get older, I'm like, it was not one of my favorites growing up. As a kid, I was like, oh, Carrie's cool, but I was like, even I think at that point I'd even rather watch Firestarter, which isn't bad either. Firestarter is great, but again, a forgotten film in his canon. But as I've gotten older, the themes, the ideas of Carrie, Brian De Palma's direction, all the acting, it's become every year I have a greater and greater appreciation for it, and also the things that it's kind of inspired. But I just feel like if we're going to talk about his adaptations, that should be one of the most important. Besides the fact that it was his first, I still to this day hold it up as one of the top three.
Casey, what are your thoughts on Carrie?
I like Carrie. It's not. I've probably seen it. Truth be told, maybe like 3 times in my lifetime. But I do really love it. Like I said, De Palma, the way he tells that story, I find fascinating. Like the creative choices he made with all the split screen stuff, all the soft lighting and stuff. It kind of looks like this. He almost shoots it like it's like some romanticized TV movie or something, and it's really interesting considering like all the horrible things that are happening in it.
Yeah, I will say though, that's one thing that I think worked so well is all those stylistic decisions, because I think when adapting that story, and I think this works with any story, adapting any work of fiction, there are things that are going to be described on the page that you have to figure out a way as a director or adapting a written work to the screen. You have to make choices that are going to kind of capture mood. And the thing is, with Stephen King, a lot of the way he writes all of that first person narration, a lot of times in certain stories, sometimes it comes, if you've done wrong, it can be really fucking hokey. Other times in Stand By Me, it's, it works really great. But all of De Palma's weird, like his lighting, like you said, the cut screens, the movie has this the music, which again, I feel like the music choices in that movie help it so much. It gives it this weird, surreal, dreamlike, nightmarish in a way, even though it's not not until the end is it really the scene with the mother, when the mother dies, that's pretty nightmarish. But
and it just said Piper Laurie, we haven't even mentioned yet. And
well, that's what I said. I try, the fact that she found it, she thought it was a comedy, she didn't think it was serious, so she kind of overplayed it, like she went over the top, and it works. And I think sometimes with horror, it takes a certain level of commitment. You can't half-ass it. Either you have to play it really understated and really human, or you have to go fucking to the rafters with it. And she went to the rafters, and it works so perfectly. And I think with that kind of character, where she's a religious zealot, that was a perfect choice. I'm glad you brought up all the stylistic choice, though, De Palma made, Casey, because again, that really honestly helped why that film stands out so much.
Yeah, and I think you talked about it a little bit earlier too, like the dynamic of all the horrible things that are happening to Carrie and like how you want her to get back at these people, but then like when it happens, it's like it's so horrible, and it's just like it's almost not satisfying. You're like terrified. It's just like not only is it tragic of what they did to her, but it's tragic that it's led to her to go to be this excessive with it.
And that's what's so great about King is that he, like, you have all the sympathy for Carrie as a character, but at the end you start to see the people, like some of the people who are bad are started to actually get sympathy for her. So some people who shouldn't have done her, the one person that the coach, the one person that was on her side so it's like people die that you're like, oh fuck, not her or not them,
or even William Katt's character. William Katt's character is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, William Katt, how you are the epitome of early 80s. Your
Believe it or not.
yeah, with your William Cat hair. Great movie. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, where would just because I'm curious, like, Case, you said you've only seen it a few times, so you don't hold it to the esteem of like one of the better.
I mean,
You know,
it is, but I think because of what I said, where it's like, yeah, it's so horrible what you see and you want to see you get revenge, but then when it happens, it's just that's its own like horrible thing too. That it's kind of hard to rewatch. It's not because it's not good. I mean, it's an amazing film, but it's just like just the situations. I think for me, it's just like, oh man, I don't know if I'm in the mood to watch Carrie right now because
It's emotionally brutal.
yeah,
and I will say, like, if you are once you've read enough King, you actually realize that it's one of his more downer endings. King had especially late 80s, and I haven't read a lot of his most recent works. I try to keep up at least what the stories are, but he definitely has a hero wins kind of mentality for his endings. Very rarely do they end. Not that he doesn't have bummer endings or endings that end dark, but he has a tendency to write more uplifting endings or more satisfying endings for common audiences. So that's why it's kind of odd that like it's just a bummer. There's no way that story was going to end happy anyway. So like that's why it's so fascinating to me as far as even in the canon of his work. But
agreed. Well, let's take it, I guess, to the next dangerous woman that he wrote. The woman being Christine. But I also, I say that jokingly, but I also do mean that there are some correlations to be made between the two because Arnie Cunningham in Christine actually does have some things in common with Carrie White and Carrie in terms of being the victim. And we did a whole two-parter, the three of us, on John Carpenter, and this is one of the ones we kind of skimmed past just because we had so much to cover in that one, and we were really trying to be completists on that one. But I am curious what your guys' thoughts are on Christine, because this is another one that I discovered early on. This was the first one of his owned. The year that I got a VCR for Christmas, I think I was 11 when I got my first VCR, and it came with a VHS copy of Christine. It was one of those really old Columbia ones where it's actually enclosed on all four sides, and you have to like unbox it from the side, like it.
Yeah,
if you guys remember those, yeah.
Oh yeah, of course.
But that was a movie that, like, as a kid, it never occurred to me like how silly it was, the concept of a killer car, and within 2 years, I would have seen how absolutely ridiculous that was.
It's weird because if you look up how many goddamn movies there have been made about killer cars, it's actually a weird concept, or killer automobiles, let alone Maximum Overdrive.
Well, I think that's going to be my next natural progression, I think.
But I'll go on record as saying I think it is. Honestly, the only thing holding that movie back is the concept. Poor Keith Gordon, like he's such an actor that's so great in that role that, like, I don't know if he got typecast, but he never reached the stardom of I'm now blanking on all the kids,
the Brat Packers.
Yeah, exactly. He never reached the stardom because he was so weird looking, and
well, he also switched lanes very young. Because I mean, there's stories about on the set of this with Carpenter and on the set of Dressed to Kill with Brian De Palma. Both of those directors have said, "Man, Keith Gordon would just study us while we were working together, and you could tell this kid was going to be a director." And Keith Gordon and what's his name, John Stockwell, the guy that plays his best friend. Yeah, both of them went on to become successful directors rather than successful actors. Yeah. So, and then of course Alexandra Paul went on to Baywatch.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's a great movie. Again, score great. The visuals, Carpenter. There's all this. It's
very few people could have breathed life into this kind of story. Let's be honest.
First off, the way they made like all the effects and stuff were so well done. Like the simple practical effects, but they were so perfect for how they accomplished what they did. One thing though I feel like it never gets brought up enough is that John Carpenter can film light so well. Like he understands how to film something set at night so perfectly.
But does he film dark so well?
Yeah. The way he shot the car, this sort of almost like pornographic adoration of the car itself, the physicality of the car and stuff. It's like It's just a really interesting movie.
Because even with Alexandra Paul in it, Christine is the object of affection. That's why I say that's Stephen King's next big girl in the movies.
Yeah, and it's a movie that I feel like it's a really good movie. It's a good, again, fucking Carpenter. I mean, what are you gonna do? But at the end of the day, it's not the most compelling story. Like even Arnie isn't like, he's kind of like, I totally understand the motivation, but it's hard when you kind of dislike your main character. He goes from being kind of understandable to being kind of a dickhead, and it's like,
but that's the point. That's
I know it is.
Of the car.
I fully understand that, but I'm saying as a viewer, it's kind of hard because you're like, I don't want to hate this guy, and even though you totally understand it works for the story, and again, it might work better in a novel setting, but I think I like the movie, and again, that I'm trying to explain, I guess, if anything, why it's not as beloved and as held dearly as some of his other, even Pet Sematary, which I think is kind of a dumb concept, even though I love it. It's at least a concept that has enough creep factor that it's compelling.
It's
where
horrifying. The loss of a child is so universally horrifying, and the fear of a car is not
silly.
Yeah, it is silly.
Even though it's like in practical, more people die because of cars than any probably other thing on earth. But
well, of course,
it's a sentient car trying to kill you. It's too high concept.
The sentient car was Carpenter's concept. In the book, he's possessed by the soul of the original owner. And it wasn't even Carpenter who cut that out. It was Bill Phillips, the writer, who just thought that was going to be too sticky of an idea. It was going to actually, his original thought was this is going to end up looking too much like Griffin Dunn in American Werewolf in London. So he didn't want to bother with that special effect. But I think it was wise. I like that we never get to see the previous owner, that we get to see his brother, played by Roberts Blossom. It's so weird to pronounce his name. It's not Robert Blossoms, it's Roberts Blossom. Who was that guy creep in so many things. My favorite being Deranged, the most famous being Home Alone, but also ended up, after his final film, which I believe was The Quick and the Dead, retired into San Francisco life as a poet, which I really loved. So an artist and a poet, and he always played the gruff guy, but great character actor. Always fun to see him. And a little bit of fun casting here. Do you guys remember who Buddy Repperton is in the script?
No.
Buddy
is the bully, the main bully.
Yeah.
Who looks like the 50-year-old in high school, or I have also called him the reincarnation of Jim Morrison. He just seems like out of place in that. He's intimidating, he's scary, and maybe the idea is that he's supposed to look like he's way too old for high school. Maybe he's supposed to be a holdback or something. But Nicolas Cage,
great head of hair though.
Yes, but Nicolas Cage read for that role, and how amazing would it have been had Nicolas Cage been the lead bully in Christine?
I'm here for it.
It'd be different. I mean,
we're talking pre-H.I. McDonough. We're talking like young.
But he's like, he's like, so like the bully is so like, but like he's a good looking, dude. Like Nick Cage is just too weird.
But he could come off as dangerous.
That's true. It's funny because I always thought that actor always looked a little like John Travolta to me for some reason. And John Travolta,
that. He has Barbarino hair, so
yes, maybe like even longer than Barbarino hair.
Yeah, that's where I was getting the Jim Morrison from.
It's kind of
absolutely.
It's kind of got a Buddy Revell vibe too from 3 O'clock High.
Yeah,
greatest fucking film bully of all time, Buddy Revell. That movie,
completely agree.
God, so good.
And did you know, by the way, Kevin Bacon was originally going to be, I believe he was Arnie, and he took Footloose instead.
Yeah, it's funny that you said
that. Is he Arnie or is he Dennis? I'm not sure which now.
He was actually supposed to be. I feel like I've heard that story about him passing up blank movie for Footloose, like 4 other movies. But
he was probably offered quite a bit. I mean, he was the star of Friday the 13th at that point, so he was probably getting big offers for small movies, which Christine would have been.
Again, we've talked about Carpenter a ton. My final thought on Christine is that brought this up on a different podcast though, but I feel like it's one of the rare examples of like you couldn't remake it because the concept is so bizarre that
you get one.
Yeah. That's it, just one for history. But at the same time, especially because like a car of that age, because again, all like modern all mod cons, like all modern conveniences. As we get older, the advent of like smartphones and stuff, it was really fucked up horror movies in lots of ways. The advent of technology introduces new concepts into horror, but so many of the cliches of horror movies have been killed by the conveniences, like a smartphone, of having that device on you. But again, smart like modern cars, whatever. Modern cars are, I mean, unless you did like with a new Chucky movie remake, where it's like the car isn't some like demonic evil, but been programmed to be killer. But then that's just stupid. Like that's not even remotely scary to me. Because again, just go inside a building. What's it going to do? It's only going to get so far if it tries to crash in the building. So, anyway, but
the last thing I'll bring up about kind of what I like about Christine is how Carpenter kind of has the AM like 50s music.
Yes,
is kind of like this ironic Greek chorus of like the shit that's happening in the movie.
Keep on knocking, but you can't come in.
Yeah, like some of it might be considered too on the nose, but I think it's absolutely hilarious.
No, it was perfect.
Yeah,
I mean,
I love the soundtrack to that.
We all love Carpenter, but I'll say Subtlety was never Carpenter's greatest suit. Like he gives you exactly what you need. Like exactly. Like maybe they were a little on the nose, but again, that it suits that movie perfectly.
Yeah,
but that's a great call out, Casey. Exactly.
It's the same. I mean, not to compare the two on any other level, but Bumblebee speaks through what's on his radio. Christine was doing something very similar. So on the nose, it's literally giving dialogue to the card. I think that I think it's totally justified.
It works. I'm not like, come on, John, that was
no, but
I didn't take it that way. I'm agreeing with you completely.
But that's a thin line to perfectly execute, and I think he did it well.
But the question does remain: who built who?
You
like that segue?
I was gonna start singing it. I love the whole soundtrack is fucking great. Cocaine and AC/DC.
Welcome to Maximum Overdrive.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about it. Every time it comes up as like worst adaptation, I want to especially consider some pieces of shit other adaptations that Stephen King has gotten. I do not understand the hate for that movie. I've loved it since it came out. My mom loved it. The first 10 minutes it's probably the best opening of a movie ever. Like
it's really impressive. The first few minutes, the cars falling off the bridge starts to get a little Blues Brothers at a certain point, and that's when you go, oh yeah, Coke. But the setup of the bridge going up and like how
it's scary.
I don't know if it's scary, but it's well executed.
So here's what I'm saying. Here's why it's scary to think that it's something you cannot run.
Yeah.
Technology itself, even by 80 standards, is everywhere. So it's like everything that you take for granted, the things in your life, like a fucking Coke machine, a goddamn vending machine can kill you. It's just, to me, it's actually it's a really scary concept because, again, how do you run away from it? But here's one thing that pisses me off so much is that movie, like, I've heard so many bad reviews of it that say the cast of that movie is fucking fantastic. People shit on Emilio Estevez. Oh, he's so great as that character. Yardley Smith is so annoying but so great. The fucking piece of shit the great character.
Pat Hingle,
Pat Hingle. Thank you.
He's fucking fantastic.
So
I mean, talk about playing it to the rafters, man.
Yeah, exactly.
He knew what movie he was in.
Yeah.
So good. It's such a 50s science fiction drive-in movie, modernized for the 80s, and it's so great. I mean, dude, they're shooting 18-wheelers with fucking bazookas and shit and rocket launchers. Like, what is not to like? Well, AC/DC plays every 5 minutes. Go fuck yourself if you don't like Maximum Overdrive.
It's just so much fun, and that's exactly.
I think if Criterion ever does a version of Maximum Overdrive, that should be like on the covers. Go fuck yourself if you don't like Maximum Overdrive. James Dufresne.
I will stand by that too.
They'll invite you to their closet the week after, I swear.
But it falls victim to its own director in a sense, because the fact that it was Stephen King directing, which is not unheard of. I mean, Michael Crichton was a really good director. Clive Barker did some great directing.
I just have to say, like,
Peter Blatty.
Like, as far as like hyping Stephen King up as like, oh, he's directing this and like that kind of thing. The trailer for this movie is absolutely fantastic too, because it's literally Stephen King on screen, like, I'm gonna terrorize you. I'm gonna blow you out to the back of the theater. None of that's gonna happen, by the way. But you will still be entertained, and you will be like, you will have some decent laughs and decent like.
It's just so much fun.
That's what his intention was, and I think that's what got lost. And maybe that trailer is part of it. He will point out he doesn't remember making that trailer. So
he's so coked up on it. He's like his unibrow,
his eyes,
eyes are the size of plates. Like,
but by making it sound like this is gonna be the one, if you're gonna do it right, you got to do it yourself. And what we had already seen was The Shining and Carrie and Christine. It was advertised wrong in that respect, because it was a popcorn movie and it was intended to be a popcorn movie.
And and so many directors have elevated his work before then. So it's like, for him to like do this kind of just popcorn schlock movie, and people are expecting like Carrie or The Shining or something like that's a little unrealistic, but
people should have expected Creepshow, because that's really what it fits the best way.
Maximum Overdrive.
Right.
The soundtrack is entirely like, how do you not? I said this before, but I still stand by this. To me, it always felt like Stephen King doing his version of a Spielberg movie, which is like high concept, fun, ode to like just a crowd pleasing popcorn movie, but where people get run over by steamrollers and it's still good. If you get 5 minutes in a movie and Stephen King going, this machine just called me an asshole, if that doesn't automatically tell you what you're up for and also tell you it's going to be a fun ass movie, get the fuck out of here.
But it does lead so many, like, does that kid's bike betray him? I mean, his bike is not electronic.
Oh my God. So that scene with the steamroller and the Little League kid, James and I had a friend, Jason, that we would watch movies at his house on occasion. There was one day I was watching that movie with him and his brother, and he literally rewound the kid doing the endo on the bike and the steamroller rolling over him probably like 15 times in a row, like laughing at the top of his head. It got to a point where like me and his brother are just like, dude, are you okay? Like, yeah, it's funny, but this is like fucking excessive. So like that scene always sticks out for me because of that moment. But like just the comedy of just the kid doing like a random endo in like a flat field, like the bike did betray him. It's just like, I mean, should have fallen right there. Like,
even though I think that was just human error that it wasn't the bike. Again, when you start to think about that story logically, like the fact of like, I'm not going to get all science and physics, but essentially the physics of a car driving itself makes no sense unless the comet dust or the comet trail has invisible little, people operating the machines. Doesn't work. But
they try to imply on some level that it's aliens. There's the opening prologue, or I don't know what you would call it, and then there's one at the end, and those are amongst the cheesiest parts of the movie.
Oh, yeah.
The explanation of in the comments.
It's so 50s driving movie.
It is, and that should be your first hint. But it is wildly inconsistent, because like, why are the trucks driving themselves, but yet they're all able to drive cars perfectly fine?
Again, tons of loopholes. Like,
why is the coffee machine not acting up when the battery powered electric knife is? But you're not supposed to ask these questions. No. You're supposed to just ride with it and enjoy.
You just want to
Emilio Estevez trying to making good for himself and falling very irrationally in love with the woman that just showed up at the diner with the Bible salesman.
But see, I thought perfect example. I thought their on-screen chemistry was so great. From the get-go, I really thought, I don't know. I just, again, some of it might be rose-colored glasses, but I love that. I think the cast is so good, and like Emilio Estevez,
I think they're having fun. I don't know that part was good, but
I like it. I think they have on-screen chemistry for myself. That's just me. I think it works for me. But again, Emilio Estevez, between Maximum Overdrive and Repo Man, at one point I was like, he's the fucking coolest dude ever. Yeah. And then every other Emilio Estevez movies, I'm like, wait, what?
No,
no,
he was okay. We all know that Martin is, not just the patriarch, but the source of all the talent.
yeah.
But I don't know why Charlie was bigger than Emilio. I think they're both handsome, and I think that Emilio blows them away in talent. Not that Charlie was not talented, but I have a hard time of thinking of anything beyond Platoon where he was like great. Even in Wall Street, that's Douglas's film.
Yeah, I mean,
Are you going to say Men at Work?
Dude, I love that movie
Because that's also
I know Casey
Emilio's
loved that
film
movie
in my
too.
head.
But I'm just like, first off, Charlie Sheen's definitely the better looking of the two. I'll go.
I'll give you
Charlie
by a
Sheen
hair,
had
but
Charlie Sheen had this like animal magnet, like this. He was seen cool. Emilio Estevez, outside of Repo Man, and then like I said, arguably that's more of that. I think he's cool in this movie. To me, he's like almost the same. He's just kind of like punk rock, kind of like fuck you, dude. I don't know. I really I'm obviously a fan of him in this movie, but
I'm a fan of Charlie
then, like,
too. I'm
Mighty
not trying to draw a line in the sand between those two. But...
So let me just point out, I believe there's like 64 Stephen King adaptations, and we've talked about 4 of them. So
right,
yeah, I think we need to do like a quick checklist of like quick.
Let me give you a few that you guys might not have seen that I actually think are.
Before you do that, there's one more thing I must add to Maximum Overdrive, because this is something I just learned, and maybe you guys knew this, but I don't know. Did you know that there is like a poltergeist style rumor about who really directed Maximum Overdrive?
No.
Nope.
George Romero was on the set every single day, and when you add in that Stephen King had such a coke habit, a lot of people are claiming that Romero, at the very least, co-directed Maximum Overdrive, which I find very interesting.
It's funny. Wow. I just assume that because of the timing and everything, and like, but I mean, do you really want to hang that cross on?
Yes, because I think that Romero, as the guy who directed Creepshow, understands like the more absurd comic booky side of Stephen King's work.
This is actually a great transition. Let's talk about this real quick, because again, I think it's one of the more beloved adaptations, or not adaptations, but Stephen King work, because again, Creepshow 1 and 2 are not adaptations. They're inspired by old 50s horror comics, but they're completely own. And it's such a great combination of two talents. It's such a great, you see both the Stephen King in it in the first one and the Romero, and it works perfectly. I still hold up that I still love Creepshow 2. I still think, despite some problems, I think The Raft is still my favorite of any of the stories, even more than the crate. But yeah, great. Again, Creepshow doesn't need to lie to be said. It's one of those rare movies that I know of people in my life who like movies but aren't necessarily horror fans, but everybody I know loves the first Creepshow. It's such a great product of its time. If you like horror comics, 50s horror comics, it's like, if you like old EC comics and, Vault of Horror and all those stuff, it definitely, you can, it's such a great homage to that stuff.
It's also great how they shot it to make it look like that too. Like it looks like a comic book, like more so than I think a lot of films do. Like no matter
absolutely.
The editing, the lighting, so much of it, so many factors went into it. And I think that it's severely underestimated for its influence on that era of storytelling, just in the same way that the EC Comics inspired Creepshow. Creepshow then went on to inspire the EC Comicsification of so many other things, like Tales from the Crypt, like Tales from the Dark Side, which Romero produced, Monsters. Even King's Cat's Eye, I'm sure, was a response on some level to like, let's do another anthology piece. So Creepshow really had a lot to do with shaping 80s horror. And for me on a personal level, and I think for everybody in the 80s on an artistic level. And it's fun to see King acting as Jordy Verrill. It's still his biggest acting role. He's playing it for the Rafters. He was told by George Romero to play this. The entire character is played the same way that Wile E. Coyote looks when he realizes he stepped off the cliff. That was the direction that King got from Romero, and you can see it on his face the whole time. But early great work by Ted Danson, funny Leslie Nielsen.
Well, post funny, but then pre funny because he was funny in the 70s. But then people.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
This was post Airplane and Police Squad,
but before Naked Gun, exactly. But yeah, so great. Again,
Adrian
all
Barbeau,
the story,
Hal Holbrook. I mean, it's really a great cast.
great cast. Yes, I mean, again, I still like the second one a lot. People shit all over it.
I
I
still
really like the
enjoy it.
second one too. Like, in fact, I think I probably watched the second one more than I've watched the first one because the second one came out like kind of right. Was it like 87 or so?
Yeah.
87,
Yeah, and that was like the year when I was first starting to like really get into horror and like watching VHSs of them and stuff because my mom still wasn't letting me go to the theater to see that stuff. We'd watch a lot of stuff at like my friend's house who was like a neighbor like after school because like his dad worked at night and so like they would rent horror films all the time. We'd go watch them. And yeah, that one stuck out because that was during that whole period and I just remember watching that a lot and loved The Raft and the whole "thanks for the ride, lady" hitchhiker.
Yeah, me and Joe would quote that to each other. Thanks for the ride. We clearly it became
yeah. And then it wasn't until like afterwards where it's like, oh well, Creepshow 1's like amazing too, and then like just kind of both of them kind of just became.
But I think it's
fairly rewatchable for me over the years. So.
Yeah, I love part two. I will still hold the part one as the masterpiece, and part two is just being a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it is a lot of fun. And did you know Barbara Eden was supposed to play the hit and run driver in the Hitchhiker?
What?
That would have been crazy. I would have loved to have seen that.
Oh wow,
I've never heard that. That's wild. Oh God, I mean that's the thing. Is there's so many actual still good Stephen King adaptations we haven't talked about.
While we're on anthologies, and because we just brought it up briefly, like I would like to talk how awesome Cat's Eye is because I really do like that movie. I do think all the stories in that are kind of interesting and entertaining.
Yeah, I like every story in that one.
Yeah, and like the Drew Barrymore one definitely has like that trilogy of terror vibe with the demon thing, and yeah, that's just a fun ass movie. Like I think all three stories in that anthology were good.
Yeah, Stephen King, Drew Barrymore, and a cat. I'm all on board. That's all I need, especially as a kid.
And it attempted to create a King multiverse before anything else ever did, because there's cameos by Cujo and Christine in the opening.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yes, exactly. While we're talking about this, I do have to bring this up. I work for a certain company that did a TV series that was supposed to be, like the it was. I work for the company that produced Castle Rock, which when I heard about it, I was not more excited for anything ever. I was like, a TV series that's going to tie in a bunch of, and famously, Stephen King's novels there are characters that bounce back and forth between different. So I was really excited for that TV series. Unfortunately, first season was okay, and then the second season was just boring as fuck. And it still breaks my heart to this day that it didn't live up to the potential. Real quick, though, I do want to just mention a few that I don't know if you guys have seen that I feel like deserve some attention. First is the adaptation of Night Flyer.
I never saw that one.
Never seen it.
Regularly regarded as one of his worst adaptations, and I think that's fucking such a it's so not fair. The reason that people don't like it, one, is that the Night Flyer, the vampire, the story is basically about this guy who is very timely. And it's not coincidental that it was written right after King almost died in a car accident, and all the tabloid press about it. But it's about this tabloid reporter who there's this. He works for basically like, the Enquirer or one of those like, or like Inside Edition type of thing, where it's, tabloid journalism. And so he works for this tabloid paper that basically there's a serial killer going around and he's using a plane and flying to different airports and killing people. So Miguel Ferrer is basically this bitter, he's a cynic and he's mad at life. And that's why he's an interesting character for King, because again, he's a straight up asshole. I've heard complaints that say Miguel Ferrer played him more of an asshole than the book, but he's not likable in the book either. He's kind of a dickhead in the book. It's basically this guy, this vampire is flying around airports and killing people. And there's so much about the actual movie works. I think the things that hurt it is that the vampire itself is kind of goofy. He's far more monstrous when you see him. And the way that I actually like the way that you never really, the camera, even though the press for it, and you can see the image of I think it was even the cover of the actual release for it. It was like the monster.
I have it in my head. He's kind of bat looking.
Yeah, but he's got like a giant, instead of like being like a classic example. He's got like a giant like one tooth in the middle of his face, but he also wears like a fucking collared cape, like a Dracula cape, which
He
is
sounds like Count Chocula, actually.
yeah. Yes, he's very instead like the
Is Count Chocula the Night Flyer?
Or Frank Costanza's lawyer.
Exactly. But it's a really, first off, the ending is great and it's very dark. The whole way it's basically was really prescient before TMZ and before, how rampant tabloid journalism has even become, basically saying that those people profiting off of the murders of other people for entertainment are monsters themselves. And it just had a really interesting concept.
Like it's got some Nightcrawler in there.
Yes, which is one of my favorite movies ever, but one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years. It's just a great take on a vampire movie that does something different. The ending is fucking great. It's definitely better than the short stories ending. Anyways, it's really solid. It gets all the shit, but I think Miguel Ferrer is great in it. Yeah, he's very unlikable, but you sort of see where he's at. Like he's not just a dickhead because he's a dickhead. He's a dickhead because this life that he's living and having to basically hustle in this constant negative, way. It's really good. The other one I want to talk about real quick is, I don't know if you guys saw, oh my God, now I'm almost calling it Dolores Claiborne, but no, it's not. Good Lord, I'm blanking. What's up? Yeah, no, that's I think that was up for an Academy Award, right? For something. It's yeah. God damn it, no, it's
Hearts in Atlantis.
Oh shit, this is gonna bother me. I can't believe I just blanked the name. But one thing I will say though, because even though we originally said movies, but I don't know if either of you guys saw The Outsider on HBO, the original series, or the HBO original Outsider based on the Stephen King. Fucking phenomenal. One of the all-time best Stephen King adaptations of all time. The cast is fucking great. It's so good. It lives up to it, the pedigree of it being an HBO original and Stephen King. I try to, anybody who hasn't seen it, I'm like, watch it immediately because it's great. It's not Dolores Claiborne. Gerald's Game. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, that was the one I was going to bring up too, actually.
See, so you have to see this. I really wanted to watch it before we sat down to do this, and I just didn't find the time this week. But it's so good.
It's really great. It's really tense. It's actually better than the goddamn story. There's a scene in it which is, I think they actually just talked about it on that Shudder original, the
101 scariest movie moments. Yeah,
but dude, it deserves. I mean, I don't know if it's scary, but it's fucking disturbing.
It stresses you the fuck out.
Yes, absolutely, and the way it's filmed. But it's such a great the what's her name? Oh God, I love her so much. I'm blanking on her
Carla
name.
Gugino.
Carla, God, she's so. Anyways, she's so good in it, and the story is basically all taking place in one location without besides flashbacks over. But it's so tense and it's so well written and so well acted. And again, there's a very hard to watch moment of on-screen violence that it lives up to its hype. It's one of the rare cases where you're like, oh fuck, that is hard to watch. But and I'm a gore hound. Like I'll watch anything gory. But Casey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mike Flanagan. Like I mean, most of the stuff he's done I've really enjoyed and I thought was genuinely creepy, and I think he's a new solid horror auteur, if you will. But yeah, I just thought he did a really good job with it, because a lot of people, I think a lot of the reason why no one had done it before is because they thought that the material was just way too hard to translate to film.
Yeah.
Because it is just a lot of the story is just so much about her internal fear and what's going on with her while she's trapped,
and her history of trauma and stuff that she's
and so he found the way to really interpret it well, and it's a great adaptation. And the scene you're talking about is so hard to watch. It's it's painful.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you put yourself in that character's shoes, because that's literally her. She has to do it, but you put yourself into her thing of I don't know if I could do that. Oh, the way it's done, it's so perfectly done. It literally could not have been handled better. So
I will definitely watch it. I'm even more convinced now I need to see it. And I know the scene of which you speak, so I'll be ready to wince because it sounds pretty harrowing. But but Flanagan's Dr. Sleep, it should be mentioned too, I thought was better than it had any right to be.
Big fan of Doctor Sleep. Yeah, I was shocked at how well he not only interpreted the story, but how he was able to bring the actual book world of The Shining into it and like kind of merge them all together.
Yeah,
I
and
thought
do
was
it
very
without
interesting.
seeming like he was even trying. Like it was
Right.
just
It's just
seamless.
there's images in that and scenes in that movie that'll like always stick with me forever. Like just the way that he filmed it and the way it was orchestrated, I just thought were really powerful and visually just like very striking. And yeah, I hope that that movie kind of gets more of an audience as time goes on, because I think I think enough people like it, but I don't think it gets the kudos that I think it deserves. I think it should be as considered a classic King adaptation as much as any other ones.
I think it's
Yeah,
one
and
that's
I
only
think
going to
this.
grow in estimation, though. Like, I think the way that our generation and the generation before us kissed the ass of Kubrick, that is starting to fade. I think a lot to do because of the Shelley Duvall footage not getting out, but finally being noticed because it's been out for a long time. But I think as time goes on and people are less worshipful of Kubrick, I legitimately think that another generation or two down of horror fans will be straight up debating which was better, Doctor Sleep or The Shining. And I think there's a relevant argument for Doctor Sleep as well, just in terms of, I mean, the shit with the boy, the baseball player kid.
Yeah, man. I mean,
It's one of the
they
most
just don't.
disturbing things I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenes where they don't pull punches, and it was shocking to see because it was like this kind of mainstream, like Warner Brothers mass distributed movie, and it was just like, wow, that is fucking horrible, like to
Right?
watch and like just terrifying. And so like I appreciated that not only that he did it, but he was allowed to do it.
Yeah.
And
And
so
and
but
then by the
yeah,
time he gets to the Overlook, it should be falling apart, but somehow it still manages like you can't believe it. I think I mentioned it in our last Halloween episode, when we were talking about Halloween Kills, and I was comparing it to Doctor Sleep in the sense that Halloween Kills is so Easter egg heavy, and it has all the flashbacks, and you get to revisit Halloween 78, and how I felt like that was some of the best parts of Halloween Kills, but that it didn't necessarily earn some of the callbacks. Whereas Doctor Sleep seems like it shouldn't earn any of the callbacks, but it's a I get giddy seeing the callbacks in Doctor Sleep. And then once you get to, I had to watch it twice, the scene twice, to realize that that was Henry Thomas in. I don't know if I'm going to spoil it for anybody, but Henry Thomas is playing a character that you don't expect Henry Thomas, the kid from ET, to be playing. So I mean, doing it fantastic and deserving the spotlight
I
for
mean,
that moment.
I'll just go on record as saying, like, I mean, just the fact that Mike Flanagan did the impossible, which was adapt that book. The book was pretty well regarded. When King said he was going to do a sequel to The Shining, people were obviously like, skeptical. But the book was pretty well regarded,
Including myself.
Yeah, and rightfully so, because those things have a tendency to just not live up to the history and the hype that people individually sort of create for themselves. But as much as that was nice and surprising, was that the book was actually really good and people actually liked the book. I don't think anybody expected the adaptation to be as good and to be as well regarded as it ended up being. And the fact that it was one of those movies, I remember when it came out, and I was waiting to see it because my twin brother bought the novel and he was supposed to let me borrow it, and I was like, well, I'm not going to see the movie until I watch the movie until I see or read the novel. I remember specifically thinking, like, I'm going to watch it even if everybody shits all over it because I just want to watch it. And then I remember being shocked that continually people were like, dude, it's fucking really good. And being like, really? That's so good. I'm glad for it. Came out not that long after the adaptation of The Dark Tower, which was quite the opposite. Easily regarded as one of the, which I've still never seen. Never
Me
seen
neither.
and I never probably will see.
I did see it. It's not good, like in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I believe that.
I mean, the performances were bad. Like, it just wasn't bad, and McConaughey wasn't bad, but they had no script for those two guys. Like,
and that's the thing that's heartbreaking because I love Idris Elba. Obviously, Matthew McConaughey is fantastic. I mean, but obviously they're both great. So on paper, I was really excited because I also thought if anybody could play, it was Matthew McConaughey, but it was just
100%.
But with that said, I mentioned this to you guys. while we were face to face, but I still have not seen Doctor Sleep in one full setting. I've fallen asleep and had to watch it in parts multiple times. Not necessarily criticism of the movie, but again, I feel like you can't fully judge a movie unless you've been able to because again, you lose some things if you watch it in parts. But I will say, yeah, I mean, it's definitely visually, it's fantastic too. And I thought that was the part that was like, how do you compare this Kubrick as a visual filmmaker? But did a damn good job. Ewan McGregor, who hadn't done a lot at that, had kind of disappeared for a while. Really great as Danny. I thought he was really great in it. I did think
Danny's that the in there too. By the way, it's the only other movie he's done. I think
done. Yeah.
But he can't.
But yeah, glad that it's become one of those films, and even the director's cut, people love it even more. So one I want to talk about real quick. We've talked about on this podcast before, and we mentioned his other Stephen King adaptations already. But I feel for me, The Mist is one of those films I can rewatch and rewatch. It's very divisive.
Bring that up, yes.
It's very divisive, and I totally understand why. Not just because of the ending, but some people I think people misunderstand what it's trying to be.
It's top 10 Stephen King adaptations of all time in my head.
Yeah, it's in my top 3. I think it's
top 5 at least.
To me, the only thing holding it back is its terrible CGI, and I truly hope one day they re-release it with improved CGI because the tentacles look like video games.
That stuff works a little bit better in black and white, which is what it was intended to be anyways. But it still looks like goofy CGI.
I was going to say, because I remember when the black and white was getting released, and I remember thinking, oh, maybe it'll be better.
By a hair.
Incrementally, yeah, exactly. It's still really bad. It really takes me out of the movie. And the thing is, that's a fucking harrowing scene when that fucking tentacle, famously, the ending is a very pessimistic ending, but I love that. And I think that was a smart choice by Darabont. Very divisive, but I think for the people that appreciate it, it really works. The one thing I feel like people I never see brought up, because people talk about Marcia Gay Harding's performance as the over-the-top religious zealot.
She's so good.
She's great in it, and she does steal the show.
Will Sadler is great in it.
Yeah, the whole cast is great.
Thomas Jane, of course.
But the other thing is, Thomas Jane, really, you understand his motivation. At no point does he do something and you're like, I don't get that. Because at the end of the day, he's just he's thrown in this crazy situation. He has a good heart, but he's trying to get through it. He's trying to protect his son. And, even the moral statement at the end of the movie, is a little, unfair, I think, where it's like, if they just, went with this woman and thought of somebody other than themselves, they would have survived, and this woman who was in desperate need of help was abandoned, and she's the one that lives and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's an interesting plot. It's an interesting point. But again, I do think like morally, he was just trying to do the right thing and protect his kid. And, anyways, but because of all of that, that's why I think it works so well. And I think Thomas Jane really grounds it. And I think this Thomas Jane character being in kind of an ode to Drew Struzan was really interesting, and an addition to the movie that wasn't in the book. And I forget the amazing actor that plays his neighbor, but he's so fucking great. Their relationship in the movie is different from the novella, from the short story, and I think it works really well. It's just a great movie. It's just so entertaining while also being genuinely upsetting. The concept is upsetting. It's very Lovecraftian too. Like there's so much there to kind of get into, but I really love it. It was one of those things. As soon as the movie was over, I was like, this is fucking become one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations. Just everything about it worked for me except for the shitty CGI.
I always looked at it as Darabont and King doing Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
It's like
it actually has some things in common with Maximum Overdrive, if you think about it too.
Yeah, it's just like everybody's trapped in this thing. Everybody has varying opinions of like what should be done. The fact that he initially wanted it to be in black and white, and kind of like the down ending. Like, I mean, I see a lot of parallels with like Night of the Living Dead in those aspects. And so I don't know if people watching it would have that in mind, like while watching it. And so like when that ending happens, they're just being like, what did I just watch, for all these past 2 hours. And then like, it's just comes to a fucking halt like that. And you're just like, oh man, like, I don't know how to process that. but I think the viewers of Night of the Living Dead when it first came out were probably like the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
very astute. Like, not quite the same ending, but like same vibe, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
just as far as taking it to a turn, like A, you weren't expecting it, B, like kind of bleak, like
yeah,
it's
very bleak.
yeah.
But bleak in a realistic way. It's not
right.
just it's totally understandable, and it's as Devin likes to say, it's earned. Like the ending is earned because of everything they go through in that thing. Everything seems hopeless and like, oh god, dude. It's actually honestly, it's one of the few movies that like it truly unnerves me when I think about that situation. Because if you think about, you don't know what's out there, and that's again not being able to fully see things. That's I've gone on record things like Jaws or Nope. The inability to fully clearly know where the danger is, that's scary. But
Yeah.
just that concept of like things from another dimension, and from what we've seen, they're horrifying, and we are like less than bugs in their presence. It's such a great concept and truly scary.
Andre Brower, by the way, is the neighbor. I want to make sure.
Oh, he's so good
because he's so good in that. Yeah,
he's so good. Real quick, and we can definitely talk about more. I want to say some of my least favorites. The Mangler, which is unfortunate because yet another thing that
Toby Hooper,
poor Robert Englund was attached to that sucked. Thinner, which I've heard people defend it recently in the last year. I fucking hate it with every fiber of my being. The fucking terrible fat suit is still ruins. Anytime that anybody tries to defend that movie, I just think of that actor in that terrible fat suit. I'm like, fuck this movie. It's so. I mean, the concept is fine, whatever, but it's annoying. The movie Cell, which could have been good, I guess. It's still, to me, it's like, insert that meme of Abe Simpson yelling at the clouds. Like, it's just like old man doesn't like technology. So I don't know if you know it, but it's basically it's the second Stephen King adaptation that features John Cusack and Sam Jackson, but where people are being driven crazy by their cell phones, and it's like a zombie movie due to cell phones, and it's just, to me, it's just so corny and hackneyed, and so like old man doesn't like technology, which I mean, fair enough, but it's just, I don't know, just and as a movie, it's just flat and boring. With that said, though, I do have to talk about one of my personal favorite Stephen King adaptations that is, I feel like doesn't get enough love, but that's 1408.
I think a lot of people forget that it was a Stephen King movie.
And it's actually a really great adaptation. It's, again, they improve on a few things. I think John Cusack is great in it. I think Sam Jackson is great for the little he's in it. I love the idea that you have this guy who's this, he basically is he like writes these books about haunted locations, but he himself is total skeptic, doesn't believe it. And he basically feels like a sellout, blah, blah, blah. But it does hit on, and I think I've mentioned this before, one of the rare things that honestly broad concepts that kind of gets under my skin is people that are trapped in scenarios that they can't get out of. And not because of practical things, but because the place itself won't let them leave. Even quote unquote bad movies like Demon Wind, Night of the Demons, there's certain things that honestly kind of like freak me out a little bit. But it's such a great ghost story where it's like you're set up to all this movie to sort of roll your eyes at these haunted locations. And I think, again, John Cusack does that role so well. But anyways, it's got a great ending. I saw it in the theater and I genuinely loved it, but didn't get great reviews. I think it's one of those films that now people have come to sort of, it's got a bigger appreciation. I know some people I've brought up to, like, that movie is actually really scary, really.
Yeah, fans seem to really like it. I do remember the critics not being so great on it, but our whole social group really liked it.
That's good, yeah. And I think for a ghost story, for a modernization of a ghost story, I think it's really cool, and it's got some really fucking scary moments and some cool concepts in it. And again, I think grounded by John Cusack was perfect for that role, and the small amount Sam Jackson's in it, he kills it too. And there's some great set pieces in it too. Anyways.
I also would point out, just very briefly, Stephen King's 1993, which saw two films come out, both films taking place in Castle Rock or around Castle Rock and featuring Sheriff Pangborn as characters.
Yeah.
It's The Dark Half, directed by Romero, and Needful Things, directed by Charlton Heston's son. I can't remember his first
Fraser
name.
Heston.
Fraser Heston, yes. I saw both of these in the theater. Loved them both. I had read the books to both of them before I had seen the movies, and I honestly can't remember how accurate they were to the books. I remember them not being too far off. Maybe some gender flipping on some of the characters and things.
I don't
Cat,
think Need for Things was a good adaptation myself.
I thought it was
think
fun. What I would like to see, and I never got a chance to see this, but apparently TBS went to Fraser Heston and said, we have to cut too much of it in order to show it on TBS. Can you make us a longer cut? And he made them a 3-hour long two-parter. So apparently there is like a mini series version of Needful Things with the same actors that has over an hour of footage reinserted that he had to cut, including the stuff with Elvis's sunglasses and some things that you kind of see in the background. And I think they actually, I don't think they finally fixed the ending. In the original ending, there's a kid who commits suicide, and you could tell that the way they cut it in the 1993 version, the gun goes off, the screen fades to black, and we cut to another scene. Did he kill himself? Maybe he didn't. And then you see Ed Harris as Sheriff Pangborn saying, I just watched a kid almost kill himself. And you can tell that it's ADR because his mouth says kill himself.
Yeah.
And so it was really shabbily done. I think it probably would have been more effective if it had gone through it. I mean, as disturbing as child suicide is, you're talking about a movie where, Satan is manipulating an entire town. I don't see it as inappropriate for a Stephen King movie to go in that direction. But I love Max von Sydow in it.
Yeah, I mean, the cast is great.
And I love the Rick and Morty that was inspired by it. So
exactly, I was wondering if you'd seen that. That's actually one of my favorite Rick and Morty bits.
Me too. Like when he finds out that the devil tried to kill himself because of him, and how much Rick laughs at that.
Yeah, exactly. Very quickly, not a tangent. Rick and Morty is one of those shows that is genuinely great, but the goddamn audience ruins it for me. But is very intelligent and deserves its kudos. But yeah, as a movie, Needful Things doesn't work for me. It's one of the things where I'm like, God, I would love to see another adaptation of this, another attempt. Which is sad though, because Max von Sydow, Ed Harris, like great cast.
J.T. Walsh.
Yep, exactly. It's very uneven and it's honestly a little boring. And that story should not be boring. Dark Half I haven't seen forever, but I liked it. Definitely a good movie.
Timothy Hutton apparently was just unbearable on the set, which is frustrating. But it's Romero, so to me, there's no bad Romero. There's just lesser Romero, and I feel like this kind of falls a little bit more on that side of things. And I would much rather watch Creepshow than Dark Half. But I think Dark Half does play with a larger theme. And of course, this was very much about Stephen King killing off his own pseudonym, Richard Bachman.
Yeah.
So, but also they say it's about him quitting drugs. So it really is him ditching the other side. But honestly, like half of Stephen King's output is about him going sober. So it's a very common theme for him. But I remember liking The Dark Half. Both of these movies I haven't seen in a very long time.
I was going to say, it's funny because I've seen Needful Things semi-recently, but I haven't seen The Dark Half in probably 15 years. When doing this, I was like, there's all these movies I'm going to rewatch. And then it coincided with a vacation and a bunch of stuff. So like I was going to rewatch, and I don't know why, but because I saw two movies in the theater that I was, Lawnmower Man, which is fucking terrible. And it is only an adaptation in name.
He doesn't even list it on his own website. King doesn't. He actually sued to have his name removed from it.
It's literally an adaptation, literally basically name only. It's basically a new millennium version of Flowers for Algernon. It's so bad. And I know people who like it, and it's fucking terrible and terrible CGI. But the other was Sleepwalker. And I actually saw that in the theater on my friend Robbie Gillum's birthday. And it really kind of, I think I've only seen it one other time besides that, and I still have very weird feelings about it. Because it's a fucking weird ass movie.
It is a very strange movie. And it had, if you ever want to watch cat incest,
which is, it's real. As somebody who had a lot of cats growing up, and you guys know that, that's not an exaggeration. It's real in the cat world. I think it's after 1 year old, they don't see each other's relatives anymore. They just see it as another cat. So cats fuck their siblings all the time. But yeah, it's weird. It's a fucking weird thing to make a movie out of.
It's a very strange movie. And I just found out as of today that was actually a real sex scene. That was, it's directed by Mick Garris. This was his first Stephen King movie. He has gone on to become kind of the god of Stephen King miniseries, much like Romero was kind of considered to be the biggest carrier of King adaptations on the big screen. But yeah, according, I guess Mick Garris has even confirmed this that Brian Krause and Alice Kriege, at the last minute while they were filming the scene, decided to go whole hog, so to speak, and he allowed it. But it really adds a whole new level to something that already makes people want to vomit.
Yeah,
So,
very bizarre.
did you see Sleepwalkers, Casey?
I haven't. I've always heard mixed things about it over the years. As far as my list of stuff, I just want to bring up really quick. As far as good goes, I mean, whether it's a great movie or not is questionable, but I really do like Firestarter.
Yeah,
Great.
It's
I
really.
think it's cool.
I haven't seen the remake yet, but
I
did
haven't.
enjoy
I
the
haven't
movie.
either. But the score is good. I did listen to Carpenter's score for it. But yeah, it's just a fun movie. Like it's just really interesting. Again,
George
I
C.
don't know.
Scott.
Yeah, I don't know how faithful it is to the book, but that's a fun movie to watch. Cronenberg's Dead Zone, I think.
Yes, I was waiting for us to get to that.
I
Great.
really wanted to bring up Dead Zone as well. I wasn't sure whether it was one of the ones that qualified as not quite horror, but it feels like horror to me.
Yeah, it's like psychological thriller, but it's
Go
it's
ahead.
fucking great. So it gets a pass.
Say what you were going to say, Casey. Sorry, I just get
Just
excited.
yeah, it's just really well done. It's more of I think more of like a psychological thriller than it is a horror movie, but I do think, Cronenberg doing Stephen King is always going to be, I mean, just the idea of it's going to be enticing, but I think the
Absolutely.
execution's really well done too. I was going to bring up Dark Half. It's I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember watching it first run going like, oh, this is kind of interesting. The way it was, you could tell how personal a story it was for Stephen King. I thought was interesting too, like that he kind of exposed that aspect of himself in that manner. One I hated that I saw in the theater was Graveyard Shift.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever seen that movie?
I saw it when it came out on video.
God, it was so boring and dumb. Like, I mean, I don't know if I'd have a change opinion of it now because I don't think I've seen it since like 1990, but God, it was just not good.
I'm positive it didn't get better.
Yeah. And then yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of not a horror movie, but I absolutely love it. And the fact that it is an adaptation of something Stephen King wrote as Richard Bach.
I know I was going to bring this up.
Is The Running Man. The Running Man. Oh God. Like I love it. I don't know if you could consider it a great movie, but that's a great 80s action movie. It's a great Schwarzenegger movie. I think it's one of Schwarzenegger's most quotable movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can watch The Running Man any given time, any condition. Like
yeah,
1010%.
It's so.
I think Casey, when we first became friends, that was one of the things that I think we bonded over was like mutual love, and then your incredible impression of
ram it into your stomach and break a goddamn spine. Dude, that movie,
it's in my list of movies I can watch. If it's on TV, I will watch it. I've seen it a million times. It never gets old to me. It's perfect and exactly what it is. It's unashamedly exactly. I mean, it's not nothing like the novel. Nothing like the novel.
No,
I mean, very rudimentary, but a great fucking 80s action movie.
Yeah, not a faithful adaptation, but a good one.
But a fun one. Yeah. By the way, I just need to point out though, because Graveyard Shift is not only done. It's that like really kind of like the Mangler, very stupid concept. Like just like what? This is Stephen King, but Brad Dourif fucking kills it in that. He steals every scene he's in.
I forgot that was Brad Dourif.
It's been so long since I've seen the movie, I forgot he was in it. But no, normally I love Brad Dourif.
He's only a support. He's like plays the exterminator, but he's great.
But the sad thing about Brad Dourif is like, if you know Brad Dourif's in the movie, you know he's the one that did it. Like so it's like any kind of like it's like, oh, there's a new mystery movie out with Brad Dourif. It's like, that's not a mystery, it's fucking him.
I was literally listening to a review of a movie. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But it was a late 70s movie and Brad Dourif's in it, and literally like in the review it was like, this may be the first time that Brad Dourif is not the killer.
Amazing. No, like that dude is the most typecast dude in the history of film. I'm pretty sure. It's like I've yet to see a movie where except maybe One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Well, they'll make you cry in that one, but
right, where Brad Dourif wasn't like the villain or the killer or the evil spirit. Like that's just his MO. Like, you know,
it's what he does.
that's what he does.
While I mean, it's again, every episode I'm like, I wonder if we'll get under 2 hours, and it never happens.
Never.
But one guilty pleasure, and I'll preface this by saying there's apparently like there's a bunch of sequels, and I've only ever seen the first one. I've tried to watch the second one, and I got like 5 minutes into it, but it's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, and it revisits like a bunch of concepts that are in other Stephen King movies. But sometimes they come back. For some reason, when I first saw it, actually kind of scared me a little bit, or just was like, oh, that's creepy. Which, you know,
yeah, I remember seeing that when it aired because that was a TV movie.
Yeah,
and I liked it then. I thought it was creepy then, but it didn't stick with me. Maybe I need to see it again.
I think again, Stephen King must have been bullied by greasers in his high school years because, first, I think Tim Matheson's so perfect for. He's so weirdly exactly a Stephen King character. Like he feels like a Stephen King character. I was like, oh, he's really good in this. It's not a great movie, but it's fun. And but again, it's like there's weird. It's like Stephen King has a weird thing with his relationship between younger and older brothers. He was picked on by bullies in the 60s, or you know, greasers in the 60s. It just there's a lot of themes that you know just are like he was writing other novels like, oh, maybe I'll revisit this later, and you know,
he writes multiple young women who start fires, and lots of, every other character is either a writer or a teacher or both.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Again, he definitely has themes he revisits. I feel like I'm trying to like cram in all these like different ones I wanted to talk about.
Well, we haven't mentioned Children of the Corn, but maybe that's for the best. I don't know.
No, I like that movie.
I've actually never seen Children of the Corn.
It's fun. There's a lot of like some of the other ones that we've mentioned. There's a lot of stuff where you're just like, that wouldn't happen. Why is that? You know, like if you try to apply logic to it, it's never going to work. But it is fun. It's pretty brutal. It's got a really scary opening.
Yeah. All the kids in it are effectively very perfect in the role. That poor, I'm forgetting the actor. I even met him. The redhead, who you know.
Courtney Gaines.
Yes, Courtney Gaines. Poor Courtney Gaines. I always feel he's always going to play.
I'm getting some really bad feedback on you.
Yeah, you're getting some sound issues.
Like you're getting like a gurgly voice behind you.
Oh, I think my internet is freaking out. Is it so bad?
Yeah.
You guys talk. I'll wait.
Okay. I mean, it's Linda Hamilton and what's his name, Peter Horton.
Peter Horton, yeah.
And they're all right in it. I mean,
Linda Hamilton's in it too, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's pre Sarah Connor or right around the time of Sarah Connor, and I think that's really where she found herself. It was actually strange to see her playing kind of the more typical 80s sort of deferent to the man sort of heroine.
Yeah, damsel in distress type thing.
Yeah. Yep. And there's some ridiculous shit where, like, you know, a kid runs out from one of the cornfields into the street and they hit him with their car. That's not a spoiler. That's the setup. And like Peter Horton goes to like investigate what's going on to see like what they hit. Cause at first they think it might be an animal and they realize it's a little boy, and the little boy had been hurt before he ran out in the road. So now it's a mystery. But while Peter Horton is looking into this kind of in the immediate sense, she goes and falls asleep in the car while she waits for him to like take care of this child that he just hit. And like right from there, I'm just like, this is dumb. Why the fuck would she fall? Like, I don't care how tired you are. You don't fall asleep while your like significant other is checking on the child that you hit with their car. Like it was, they turned it into kind of a dream sequence moment. And it was just so unearned. It's also really weird. The lead kid, Isaac, he looks really strange. Like you feel like they picked a really strange looking kid. And it turns out they picked a really strange looking 25-year-old who looked like a child because he had, I think it was similar to the kidney diagnosis that Gary Coleman had, possibly. He was about 5 foot tall. But he's actually one of the highlights of the movie. He's creepy as hell, playing Isaac. And then, of course, Mordecai is the redhead from the Burbs that we all know is creepy. James, are you back yet, or what's?
I don't know. You tell me.
You're still a little robot-y.
One I just thought of that like should have been a good adaptation with everyone involved, but wasn't, was Apt Pupil.
Yeah, that's another one of those ones that could have been potentially great.
I remember my
McKellen's
brother,
good.
my oldest brother was a big Stephen King reader, and I remember telling me years before that movie came out, he's like, if they ever do an adaptation of Apt Pupil, it'll be like the most insane story like that they could ever put on film. Like, I mean, I don't know if I agree with him based on what I know about the story, but he was just like, he was all about that story, like as far as what was written. And then like when they finally did get around to adapting it, and like, you know, you got Bryan Singer directing, you got Ian McKellen, you know, it's like, oh, this should be like a slam dunk. And yeah, just for whatever reason, it was not. And and it's been so long since I've seen it. I'm trying to remember why exactly. Like, I just think they didn't, I don't know. I think they could have like gone places a little bit darker. And I mean, there was some moments that went dark, but like, I don't know. I just seemed like it was a little, maybe kind of whitewashed.
I remember that too, but I'm gonna call it, it's too long ago for me to give an accurate
Yeah, it's
one.
been a minute, but I just remember seeing it like first run and being like, God, this is not good, and this should have been a lot better than, you know, considering everybody involved with the making of it. But, and one random one I'll bring up that I do like, and it's not an adaptation, but it's again, Stephen King anthology movies are, I think, kind of my bread and butter as far as his work, and that's Tales from the Dark Side, the movie.
Yeah,
Not as good as Creepshow,
no.
but I still think it's very entertaining. And I just watched it again maybe 2 years ago after watching it. Like, it's been probably over a decade since I'd seen it, but it was still very fun to me. It's still very much like an early 90s, like late 80s, early 90s film. It's very much a horror movie of the time it was released, but it's still fun for me to watch.
It was parts that were cut from Creepshow that became
Yes.
Tales from the Dark Side too. So they are kind of spiritual cousins. In a way, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, is Creepshow 3.
Yes. Oh, let's not ever talk about the actual Creepshow thing either. Am I still robotic-y?
You are, but let's go ahead and start edging towards closing it out rather than.
Damn it.
No, go ahead.
Anyways, but yeah, the Debbie Harry bookends are the best thing about that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's so great in it. There's literally so many. Oh, my computer just froze. Are you good? No, we're moving. It's not my internet. My internet's fine. Damn it. Sorry, guys. Sorry, listen. You have to listen to my shitty voice. Real quick, we didn't talk about Misery, which I'm going to be very honest here and say I have only seen it twice, and I like it, but it's not one I feel we need to revisit. I feel like it's one of those like great performances, interesting movie, but there's not enough reason to revisit it. It's not like a fun movie. It's a good movie, but am I the only one that feels that way?
I love Misery, actually, and I'm surprised that it hadn't come up. Yeah, especially R.I.P. James Caan. We haven't really had a chance to say anything about that since it happened. But yeah, unusual movie for James Caan in the first place because he's just kind of like a ball of fire in everything he's in. You feel like he's about ready to explode every time you see him on screen.
Yeah, he's very much kind of got like swagger and machismo.
Yeah.
And this role definitely is not any of that.
Well, to confine him to a bed was kind of genius. And the two things that I'll say that I discovered in researching on Misery, because I really genuinely love it, and I think it is one of the best Stephen King adaptations. But I think it's interesting that Jack Nicholson was offered the role first and didn't want to do another King movie because he'd already kind of been down that road. But it would have been very interesting to see Jack Nicholson as Paul. And the other thing that I was going to say that I just thought was funny was apparently Rob Reiner did not have a lot of confidence in himself making this movie because he had never made anything quite like it, even though he had already adapted King. He had never adapted one of King's horror stories. And apparently James Caan would catch him occasionally chastising himself privately, saying, "Who the fuck do you think you are, Alfred Hitchcock?" And I just kind of like that image of Reiner pacing back and forth whenever he gets frustrated, comparing himself to Hitchcock. I think that's actually kind of sweet, especially knowing that he pulled it off. And, you know, it was the only person who's ever brought an Academy Award to a Stephen King adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the best made Stephen King adaptations. And It's good. I do think it's rewatchable. But yeah, it's even though there's horror elements of it, I definitely think that's kind of like Dead Zone, where it's more like psychological thriller. But I mean, the fact that you had like William Goldman writing the script, Reiner's directing, I mean, again, that's just such a, and you know, who was cast, it's like that's just such a wheelhouse of talent. And it's like, if God help you if you shit the bed on that movie, like, you know.
It's a
but
funny
yeah,
movie to say shit the bed about too, but
yeah, no pun intended. But yeah, I mean, I could see why it's not as rewatchable for someone, despite how good it's made, because it's more of like psychological and like, you know, if you're gonna be like, oh, I want to watch like a Stephen King movie, that might not be the first one you seek out because of that.
there's not a scrap of
You might want
schlock
something
to it
more
at
like
all.
supernatural or, you know, creepier or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's one of his most highly regarded, like, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in the top 5 like best made adaptations of Stephen King by far. I think.
I would definitely stand by it.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, I think the hour is getting late. It's almost 4 past midnight. Sorry for anybody that actually knows all the Stephen King titles knows that was a title of a Stephen King book, and that was a really lame attempt. But we're also having some massive audio issues on our end of things, folks, and I'm sorry if our listeners are hearing them too. But 3 hours in is probably as good a time as any to call it. But it was really great talking to you guys about this. I know we could go on and on. We actually did an incredible job of getting the list down. I think we pretty much covered everything through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. So maybe someday we'll come back and do more of a contemporary King. But I think our hearts have already spoken for the ones that we truly love.
Yeah.
I do have a lot to say about the miniseries, good and bad, but maybe we can leave that later.
On which one?
Of the a lot of the TV miniseries.
Oh yeah, I'm not against doing miniseries. We've talked about miniseries on the show before. We actually, when we did Richard Donner, we even talked about an after school special. So
that's true. Too many to get into though. Like you said, we're late, and I was a robot, so we'll save that for a future episode.
Thanks for joining us again, Casey. It's always good to have you.
Thanks for having me. Best thing I could sum up is King's an amazing writer. There's been great adaptations of his work. There's been not so great adaptations of his work. But I think whatever you guys decide to seek out, there'll definitely be something interesting about it, even if the movie's not great. And then if you happen to watch one that is great, I'm sure you'll watch it more than once in your life because it'll be that memorable.
Yeah, there's a lot of rewatchability on this list. And he's the only author I can really think of. I mean, there are authors who have been widely adapted, but he's the only author I can think of that's kind of become a genre unto himself.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something to be said about that. I mean, that can't even be said about Mark Twain or F. Scott Fitzgerald, you know. Hemingway wrote screenplays, and I don't think that he's affiliated.
Let's also, we have to give Stephen King his credit also for being unbelievably prolific. Over 60 novels and short story collections he's published, which is unheard of for a pop fiction writer. He's very prolific and still maintaining some level of quality even up into his newest novels. So for that level alone, he deserves the title of being the greatest pop writer of all time.
Not to mention just seeming like one of the nicest guys on the planet.
Oh, I was going to say, I love Stephen King, and I'm glad that he has a lot of pride for the East Coast, for the New England area, for Maine, for Massachusetts. I feel like he's a good spokesman for.
He's definitely representing New England. I met him in New York City, and he was wearing a Ramones T-shirt, and I think that's about just the way you hope to see Stephen King is wearing a Ramones T-shirt.
Hell yes.
It was everything that I hoped it would be. But happy Halloween to everybody. Have a safe one. If you find any fentanyl in your bag, give me a call. And, I'll help you safely dispose of it. That's a horrible thing to say. I just think that it's ridiculous to be scared of it in your Halloween bag. But
exactly. Goddamn idiots.
Like, I've known a lot of people that buy drugs. I've never known a single one who wants to give it away as a weird.
I'm gonna say that's some expensive ass Halloween candy.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, have a very safe holiday. Make sure you put out the candy on your front step if you're going to be out. Otherwise, you can probably expect some eggs when you come in.
And watch some Stephen King horror movies.
Yes.
It's the season.
Have a King marathon because we all know it's going to be more satisfying than watching Halloween Ends.
That's exactly right.
If anything you take away from this episode, please take away that.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy
Thanks.
Halloween. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.